It was a Thursday morning in New York City when Jack Williams found himself standing in the bustling terminal of JFK Airport, awaiting his flight to Los Angeles. He was just another man in the crowd, surrounded by travelers hurrying to their gates, each absorbed in their own world. The flight was routine, the kind of trip Jack had taken countless times for work, but there was something about today that felt different. Perhaps it was the energy in the air, or maybe it was the anticipation of what the day might bring. Jack had always been a man of routine. He worked a regular 9-to-5 job in finance, lived in a modest apartment, and spent his free time binge-watching documentaries about tech moguls like Elon Musk. Jack wasn't particularly wealthy, nor was he someone who'd ever imagined his name in the headlines. But he admired Musk, the genius behind companies like Tesla and SpaceX. Musk, to Jack, was the epitome of success, a person who defied the odds to change the world. Today, however, he wasn't just flying for work. He had decided to take a step outside his comfort zone, something he had promised himself he would do this year. Jack had recently read about Musk's latest developments in the space industry, and the article had sparked something in him. The article described Musk's ambitious plans for colonizing Mars and creating a sustainable future on Earth. Jack found it inspiring, even overwhelming. The article concluded with a quote from Musk himself: "When you're on the verge of making history, the best thing to do is just take the leap." As he stood there in the airport, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. He boarded his flight with the same routine as always, settling into his assigned seat in the economy section. He was just about to pull out his phone and check his email when the stewardess came down the aisle, stopping just before him. "Mr. Williams, I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with your seat assignment. You've been upgraded to first class," she said, her tone pleasant but firm. Jack blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Upgraded? Me?" The stewardess smiled and handed him a new boarding pass. "Yes, sir. Please follow me." Feeling a bit like a deer caught in the headlights, Jack followed the stewardess to the front of the plane. He had never been in first class before. It was a world far beyond his reach, a place reserved for the wealthy and influential. As they walked through the narrow aisles, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mixed with nerves. What did he deserve to be sitting up there for? When they reached the first-class section, the stewardess pointed to an empty seat near the window. "Here you are, Mr. Williams. Please make yourself comfortable." Jack took his seat, his heart racing. The chair was plush, the legroom abundant. He felt like he had entered a different world entirely. The champagne flutes, the fine china, the attentive flight attendants. It was everything he had imagined but never thought he would experience. As Jack settled in, he glanced around the cabin, and that's when he saw him. At the far end of the first-class section, in the seat closest to the window, sat none other than Elon Musk. Jack froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Musk, the visionary entrepreneur, the man who had redefined technology, was sitting just a few feet away. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was unreal. He had read about Musk in countless articles, watched interviews with him, and even followed him on Twitter. But never, in his wildest dreams, had he imagined sitting on the same plane as him, let alone in the same section. For a moment, Jack simply stared. His mind raced. Was this a sign? Was he meant to meet Musk? Jack had never considered himself a lucky person. He was ordinary, with no extraordinary skills or connections. But here he was, sitting in first class with Elon Musk on the same flight. It felt surreal. And then, as if to confirm the impossibility of the situation, Musk turned his head and looked directly at Jack. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Jack felt a strange, almost magnetic connection. Musk didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him with any hint of recognition, but Jack could tell that Musk knew exactly who he was. The fleeting moment of connection made Jack feel both small and oddly validated, as if his life was somehow aligned with something bigger. But the magic didn't last long. Jack's mind quickly started to spiral. What if this was a mistake? What if Musk had the right to sit there, and Jack was simply occupying the seat by chance? The thoughts flooded his mind. Jack had been upgraded, yes, but surely that didn't mean he deserved to sit next to someone of Musk's caliber. Maybe he should switch seats. Maybe he should go back to his economy seat, where he belonged. The thought of confronting Musk made him uneasy, and Jack wasn't one for confrontation. He was just a regular guy. After all, as the plane began to taxi down the runway, Jack tried to settle into his seat. The adrenaline from the upgrade and the encounter with Musk made it hard for him to relax. He glanced over at Musk again. This time, Musk was typing something on his laptop, oblivious to Jack's gaze. The silence between them was deafening. But just as Jack was about to turn his attention back to his own thoughts, the unexpected happened. Musk's voice, deep and calm, broke through the quiet hum of the plane's engines. "So, what brings you up here to first class?" Musk asked, not looking up from his screen. Jack blinked, stunned. He wasn't sure if Musk was speaking to him or someone else. Had he really just been spoken to by Elon Musk? After a beat, Jack cleared his throat. I don't really know, to be honest. There's been a mix-up with my seat, and," Musk interrupted him, his eyes still glued to the screen. "Don't worry about it. Happens all the time. But I have to ask, what do you think about the future? The future of technology, of humanity? Do you think we're headed in the right direction?" Jack's heart raced again. Was this real? Was Musk actually talking to him, of all people? "Well," Jack began, unsure of how to respond, "I think we're on the cusp of something big. I've been following your work for years. Tesla, SpaceX, it's all so inspiring. I believe in what you're trying to do, change the world. It's incredible." Musk finally looked up, locking eyes with Jack. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he looked at Jack that made him feel like he was part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. For a moment, the noise of the plane and the world outside seemed to fade away. All that existed was this moment, this surreal connection between two men from completely different walks of life, connected only by the same flight. And in that instant, Jack realized that his life was about to change forever. "Well," Musk said with a small, almost imperceptible smile, "I guess you've got the right seat after all." Jack couldn't help but smile. He had no idea where this conversation would go, or what the future held. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the verge of something extraordinary. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jack sat there, his fingers tapping nervously against the armrest. The words, "You've got the right seat after all," echoed in his mind, bouncing around like a song on repeat. He had never imagined that one day he would sit beside Elon Musk, let alone have a conversation with him. The weight of the moment was almost too much to process. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jack had no idea where it would lead, but he couldn't afford to let this slip away. Musk's words had been casual, but there was something about the way he said them, almost as if he knew something Jack didn't. There was a knowing glint in Musk's eyes, something that hinted this was no ordinary encounter. Jack had read about Musk's uncanny ability to spot potential, to identify individuals who could change the world alongside him. Could it be that he saw something in Jack? For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to wonder, could I be someone who makes a difference? Before he could dwell on the thought too long, Musk broke the silence once again. This time, he placed his laptop on the tray table and gave Jack his full attention. "So, tell me, what's your story, Jack?" Musk asked, leaning slightly forward, as if genuinely interested. "You seem like the kind of person who doesn't just settle for ordinary." Jack wasn't sure how to respond. Most of the time, his life felt painfully ordinary. He had no grand ambitions, no remarkable achievements to speak of. He had grown up in a modest neighborhood in Queens, worked hard to earn his place in finance, and led a quiet life. But here, sitting next to one of the most influential people in the world, he felt like he needed to say something meaningful, something that would make Musk think twice. "Well," Jack started, clearing his throat, "I grew up in Queens. My mom always told me I could do anything if I worked hard enough. But the truth is, I've always felt like I'm just getting by. I'm good at my job, but that's about it. I watch people like you, people who actually change things, and I can't help but wonder if I'll ever do anything that matters." Musk listened intently, his gaze unwavering. There was no hint of judgment in his eyes, just a quiet curiosity. Jack had expected the typical response from someone like Musk, condescension or disinterest. But this was different. Musk didn't seem to be in a hurry to dismiss him. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the edge of his laptop. "You know, Jack," Musk said, his voice measured, "I've always believed that it's not about the work you're doing right now. It's about what you're willing to do next, what you're willing to risk. The people who change the world aren't the ones who play it safe. They're the ones who take the leap when no one else would." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued but also slightly intimidated by Musk's bluntness. "You think I should take a leap?" Jack asked, skeptical. "What if I fail? What if I'm not cut out for it?" Musk smiled slightly, the kind of smile that suggested he wasn't giving up on Jack just yet. "Everyone fails, Jack. It's part of the process. But failure doesn't mean you're not cut out for it. It means you're learning. If you're not failing, you're not pushing hard enough. You know, when I started SpaceX, everyone told me I was crazy. And look where we are now. You never know what you're capable of until you're forced to try." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and meaningful. Jack felt something shift inside of him. Musk's confidence, his unflinching belief in pushing beyond the limits, was contagious. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was more to his life than being good enough. What if he could make a real difference? What if he could take a leap, like Musk had? Before he could dive deeper into his thoughts, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing the plane's altitude and expected flight time. Jack glanced out of the window, the vast expanse of clouds below them stretching endlessly into the horizon. "So, what's next for you, Jack?" Musk asked again, interrupting his reverie. "What's your next move?" Jack hesitated. The question had caught him off guard. What was his next move? In truth, he had no idea. He had spent so much of his life in the rhythm of his day-to-day existence that he hadn't really considered what came after the routine. But now, with Musk sitting beside him, urging him to think beyond the ordinary, Jack realized he had to answer differently. "I guess I've always wanted to do something that matters," Jack admitted, his voice quieter now. "Something that makes a difference. But I don't know where to start." Musk nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've got a seat in first class, so let's make sure you're not just flying through life. You've got time, Jack. Time to think about it." For the first time, Jack felt like he wasn't just aimlessly floating through life. Sitting next to Musk, he realized that maybe this moment wasn't about the seat upgrade or the fact that they were on the same flight. Maybe it was a moment of clarity, an invitation to consider what he really wanted out of life. The flight continued, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Musk talked about his latest ventures, AI, renewable energy, and space exploration, while Jack listened, utterly captivated. It wasn't just the content of the conversation that had Jack hooked. It was the way Musk spoke about these projects with such genuine passion and conviction. There was no doubt in Jack's mind that Musk believed wholeheartedly in the change he was creating. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Jack realized that it wasn't just Musk's success that was inspiring him. It was Musk's willingness to embrace the unknown, to leap into the dark with no guarantees. As the plane neared Los Angeles, Jack's mind was racing with possibilities. He wasn't sure how he would apply this new perspective to his own life, but for the first time in years, he felt the stirring of something bigger inside him, something that told him he didn't have to be just good enough anymore. "I think I'll take that leap, Musk," Jack said, surprising himself with the words. "I think I'm ready to do something that matters." Musk looked over at him, giving Jack a smile that felt like a seal of approval. "Good. The first step is always the hardest. But once you take it, there's no going back." As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had no idea where his journey would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. The days following Jack's flight with Elon Musk were a blur of excitement, doubt, and contemplation. Jack had returned to his apartment in New York City, but the same four walls he had spent years in suddenly felt different, as though they were closing in on him. The ordinary world he had once been content to live in now seemed small, confining. The conversation with Musk kept replaying in his mind. The first step is always the hardest. But once you take it, there's no going back. Jack knew he couldn't just go back to his old routine. his job at the finance firm, his comfortable, predictable life. None of it seemed enough anymore. But the leap that Musk had spoken of, Jack wasn't sure what that would look like for him. What exactly was he supposed to do? He wasn't an inventor, a tech mogul, or a visionary. He didn't have a grand idea, nor did he possess the resources that someone like Musk had to make the impossible possible. He was just Jack Williams, a regular guy with an unremarkable past. Yet, the seed Musk had planted kept growing. What if he could do something that mattered? What if, just like Musk had dared to risk it all with SpaceX and Tesla, Jack could do the same in his own way? With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Jack decided to take action. He went to his boss at the finance firm, a no-nonsense man named Greg Parker. Greg was a firm believer in the grind, the work hard, get ahead mentality, but Jack wasn't sure he could stay on that path any longer. "Greg, I think I need to take some time off," Jack said one morning in the office, pacing the floor of the small conference room where they often met. Greg, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a stern look, glanced up from his papers. "Time off? Jack, we've got projects in the pipeline. You can't just bail out now." "I'm not bailing out," Jack replied, his voice steady but uncertain. "I need to figure out what I'm doing with my life. I can't keep going through the motions. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I need to take a step back." Greg frowned, clearly not understanding. "You've been thinking?" "Jack, we all think. But we don't have the luxury of stepping back. The market's changing, the firm's growing. Your role here is critical." Jack nodded, his pulse quickening. "I know, Greg, and I appreciate everything this job has given me. But I can't ignore this feeling inside me anymore. I need to figure out what comes next." Greg was silent for a moment, studying Jack. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Jack swallowed hard, the weight of his decision settling in. "I am. I'm not sure what comes next, but I know I need to try. I need to give myself a chance to do something different." After what felt like an eternity, Greg sighed and stood up, offering Jack a firm handshake. "All right, Jack. You've earned your time off. But I'm warning you, it's not easy to step away from everything we've worked for. Don't get lost in the dream without seeing the reality." Jack smiled, the uncertainty still swirling within him. "I'll figure it out, Greg. Thanks." Walking out of the office, Jack felt a strange mix of freedom and fear. He had just taken his first real step. He had made the decision to leap. But where would it take him? For the next few weeks, Jack threw himself into research. He devoured books, articles, and podcasts on innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. He began to look at the world through a new lens. Every day felt like a new challenge, a new puzzle to solve. His once comfortable life of spreadsheets and deadlines now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Instead of focusing on his shortcomings, Jack sought out areas where he could contribute. One day, while scrolling through his Twitter feed, Jack came across a post that caught his eye. It was from a startup called EcoShift, a company focused on sustainable energy solutions. The tweet read, "We believe the future of clean energy isn't just in solar panels and wind turbines. It's in the hands of people who can think outside the box." Jack felt an immediate surge of excitement. Clean energy. That was something he could get behind. It wasn't just about making money. It was about solving a real-world problem. A chance to make a tangible difference in the world. The problem was, Jack had no experience in the field. No formal training, no tech background. He had no idea how to break into the industry. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe that didn't matter. If there was one thing Jack had learned from his time in finance, it was that opportunities didn't always come neatly packaged. They often came in the form of risks, things that most people would hesitate to pursue. Jack reached out to EcoShift, sending them a direct message that simply said, "I'm passionate about clean energy and the future of sustainability. I'm willing to learn, and I want to be part of something that matters." He wasn't sure what he expected, but when he received a response later that afternoon, it was more than he could have hoped for. The message read, "Thanks for reaching out, Jack. We're always looking for people who are willing to learn and grow. We have an internship program. Why don't you come by and see if it's a fit?" The invitation was a breakthrough. Jack couldn't believe it. From an idea sparked by a single tweet to an actual opportunity to work in the clean energy space. He had no background in this industry, but the excitement and possibility filled him with determination. It was the first real sign that he was on the right path. He packed his things and flew to California a week later, ready to meet with the team at EcoShift. Walking into the office, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a whole new world. There were posters of solar farms on the walls, models of wind turbines on the desks, and people brainstorming ideas with an infectious energy that Jack had never seen before. He met with the company's CEO, Rachel Moore, a sharp and ambitious woman who had founded EcoShift to revolutionize sustainable energy. She had started the company from scratch, much like Musk had done with SpaceX. Rachel listened intently as Jack shared his story, explaining how he had been stuck in finance for years, longing for a purpose bigger than himself. How he had always admired entrepreneurs who took risks and changed the world. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "You're not the typical candidate we look for, Jack, but I admire your willingness to step outside your comfort zone. If you're committed to learning and growing with us, we can teach you the rest." Jack's heart raced. It was happening. He was about to embark on the journey of a lifetime. With a firm handshake and a sense of excitement that Jack hadn't felt in years, he accepted the internship. As he walked out of EcoShift's office, he couldn't help but smile. He had taken the leap, and there was no turning back. Jack's first day at EcoShift was a whirlwind. The office was buzzing with energy, ideas flying in every direction. People were collaborating on projects, presenting innovative solutions to the world's energy crisis. It felt like a place where every individual mattered, where creativity and passion weren't just encouraged, they were expected. And yet, despite the palpable excitement in the air, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling of being an outsider. He had no technical expertise, no background in renewable energy. He was stepping into a world where terms like sustainable infrastructure and carbon capture technology felt foreign to him. His first few weeks were filled with long hours of trying to catch up, sitting in on meetings where he struggled to understand the jargon, and frantically Googling terms during lunch breaks. Rachel Moore, the CEO of EcoShift, noticed Jack's struggle early on. During their first one-on-one, she was straightforward with him. "You know, Jack," Rachel said, leaning back in her chair, "we're not here to hold your hand. We're not a typical company that just throws people into cushy roles. We want you to learn, but we want you to show up and make an impact from day one." Jack felt a pang of discomfort. "I'm supposed to be making an impact?" he thought to himself. "I'm just trying to keep my head above water here." But Rachel wasn't done. "I know you don't have experience in clean energy, Jack, but what I see in you is your hunger to learn and your willingness to fail. You've already taken a massive leap. Now it's time to start taking risks with that knowledge." Her words stung, but there was truth in them. Jack realized she wasn't trying to be harsh. She was pushing him because she saw something in him. That was the thing about EcoShift. It wasn't about playing it safe. It was about diving into the unknown and trusting that you'd learn along the way. And so, Jack pushed through the discomfort. Every day, he came in a little earlier and stayed a little later. He immersed himself in learning the technical side of things. He took online courses on energy systems, spoke with engineers about their work, and even asked the most basic questions in meetings, which, at times, made him feel incredibly self-conscious. But he refused to let the fear of looking ignorant hold him back. Soon enough, something began to shift. Slowly, Jack started to piece together how everything fit. He understood how solar grids worked in tandem with battery storage. He began to grasp the importance of decentralized power sources and how the integration of AI could revolutionize energy efficiency. Jack wasn't an expert by any means, but he could feel himself growing more comfortable in the world he was learning to navigate. One day, after a particularly long meeting where Jack had just begun to feel like he was contributing in a meaningful way, Rachel pulled him aside. "You've made good progress, Jack," she said, offering him a rare smile. "But there's something I need to tell you. The real test isn't how fast you learn. It's how well you handle failure." Jack blinked, not understanding. "Failure?" "Yep," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "You're going to fail here. Everyone does. But the way you recover from it, that's what separates the dreamers from the doers. We don't just want ideas. We want people who can keep going, even when things don't work out the first time." Jack absorbed her words, unsure whether he should be motivated or terrified. Failure. It was a word that had always been uncomfortable to him. In his old world of finance, failure was a dirty word, something that could cost you your job, your reputation, your future. But here, in this new environment, it seemed to be a badge of honor. Fail fast, learn quickly, and adapt. The next few weeks brought their own set of challenges. Jack found himself tasked with developing a market analysis report for EcoShift's new renewable energy initiative, one that was projected to revolutionize energy consumption in major cities. Jack dove headfirst into the project, throwing everything he had into understanding the logistics, costs, and potential challenges. But then, disaster struck. Jack's report, which he had worked on for days, was met with harsh criticism in a team meeting. Rachel and the other senior staff picked apart his analysis, pointing out several errors he had missed. The numbers didn't align with the projections, and his assumptions about urban energy consumption were off base. The report was rejected outright, and Jack felt the sting of failure deeply. He could barely look anyone in the eye. I thought I had it right, Jack muttered, feeling utterly defeated. Rachel, however, wasn't there to offer sympathy. Good. You failed. Now you know where the gaps are. The key is to understand why you missed those points, learn from them, and make the next version better. The next few days were filled with self-doubt. Jack questioned whether he was truly cut out for this, whether he had made a mistake in stepping into this field. But each time the doubts crept in, he reminded himself of the conversation with Musk. Failure was just a stepping stone, a necessary part of the process. This was the real test. Determined to prove himself, Jack returned to the report with a renewed focus. He stayed up late studying, asking colleagues for feedback, and revising his calculations. Each day, he chipped away at the mistakes he had made, working tirelessly to correct them. When the new report was ready, Jack was nervous but hopeful. He presented it again to Rachel and the team. This time, there was no harsh criticism. In fact, the feedback was positive. Jack had learned from his failure and improved, and it was evident in the final product. Good work, Jack, Rachel said with a nod of approval. You took responsibility, fixed your mistakes, and delivered something better. That's what we look for here. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also a deep sense of pride. He had faced his fear of failure, and rather than letting it defeat him, he had used it as fuel to push forward. The experience had changed something in Jack. He wasn't just learning about clean energy. He was learning about resilience, about picking yourself up after a fall, and using the lessons learned to keep going. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was on the right path. He didn't have all the answers, but he was willing to keep taking the next step. After his initial success with the revised report, Jack felt like he was finally beginning to find his rhythm at EcoShift. The culture of the company was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There was an unspoken understanding that mistakes weren't failures, they were lessons. But as much as Jack had come to appreciate the openness and collaborative atmosphere, there was still an undeniable pressure. His internship was officially coming to an end in a few weeks, and Jack couldn't ignore the weight of what that meant. The question of whether he had truly made an impact lingered at the back of his mind. It wasn't enough to just learn. He needed to prove that he belonged. He needed to show that he could contribute to EcoShift in a way that went beyond just getting by. He wanted to be a part of something bigger. The next challenge came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as Jack was reviewing some new market projections, Rachel called him into her office. As usual, her face was composed, but there was an air of something more serious in her demeanor. "Jack," she began, her voice steady but with a sense of urgency, "I need your help with something." Jack leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" Rachel gestured for him to sit down. "There's a partnership opportunity we've been negotiating with a major utility company in the Midwest. We've been in talks for months now, but there's a snag. They're not fully convinced that our technology is scalable enough for their needs." Jack nodded, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "So, they're not on board?" "Not yet. But they're close," Rachel said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I've been pushing for a more concrete demonstration of what we can do, something that will show them we have the scalability they're looking for. I've heard about a proposal that might do just that, but it's complicated." It requires pulling together multiple elements of the tech that we haven't fully integrated yet. Jack's mind was racing. This sounded like a huge opportunity, but also a massive challenge. And you want me to? I want you to work with our engineering team on the proposal, Rachel said. I know you don't have a background in this, but your ability to understand the financial side of things and your recent success with the market projections makes you a good fit. I'm also hoping you'll bring a fresh perspective. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Jack felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was his chance to prove himself, but it also meant stepping into a field that was still foreign to him. There was no margin for error. This wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about delivering results. I'll do it, Jack said, determination creeping into his voice. I'll make it work. Over the next several days, Jack found himself deep in the trenches with EcoShift's engineers. Their technical expertise was unparalleled, and their passion for clean energy was contagious. But it became quickly clear that Jack's role wasn't just about offering a financial perspective. He was also going to need to build a bridge between the technical and business sides of the proposal. The engineers and the financial team spoke different languages, and Jack was caught in the middle, trying to make sense of the jargon on both sides. The engineers, led by a no-nonsense project manager named Adam, were skeptical of Jack at first. Adam, in particular, had little patience for someone who didn't speak their language fluently. "Look, Jack," Adam said one afternoon, clearly frustrated. "I know you're trying to help, but we're talking about advanced energy systems here. If you don't understand the fundamentals, this proposal is going to fall flat." Jack felt the sting of Adam's words, but he refused to back down. "I understand the fundamentals," Jack replied, keeping his voice calm, "but I also understand the market. If we want this partnership, we need to speak their language, too. I can't just rely on the engineers to do that. It's my job to ensure we're not just talking about what we can do, but also what we need to do for them." Adam shot him a skeptical look, but didn't say anything more. Jack could sense that he wasn't winning over anyone in the room, but he wasn't ready to give up. The days that followed were some of the most challenging Jack had faced at EcoShift. He spent countless hours with the engineering team, translating technical proposals into language that could resonate with business leaders. He worked side by side with Sarah, EcoShift's lead software engineer, who, despite her somewhat introverted nature, had a deep understanding of the technology and a willingness to explain it to Jack in simpler terms. Slowly, Jack began to understand more about the intricacies of EcoShift systems. He didn't become an expert, but he became proficient enough to make the right connections. The more he worked with Sarah and the engineers, the more he realized how much he still had to learn, and how willing they were to teach him. He was no longer seen as just the guy from finance who didn't understand the technology. He had earned their respect, and in turn, his confidence grew. Meanwhile, the proposal itself was coming together. Jack, Sarah, and the engineering team found a common language, one that balanced the business side with the technical feasibility. They worked late into the nights, crafting a document that showcased the scalability of EcoShift's technology and how it could be integrated into the utility company's infrastructure. It was a delicate balance of data, projections, and technical specs, but they were getting there. And then, as if on cue, an unexpected ally appeared. An external consultant named Greg Thompson. Greg was an experienced industry veteran, brought in by Rachel to add some gravitas to the proposal. He had a reputation for his no-nonsense approach, and when he came into the meeting room, the tension in the air seemed to crackle. Greg was older, with a sharp suit and a sharper mind, and he didn't pull punches. "Let me tell you something," Greg said, addressing the group. "I've worked with utility companies for over 20 years. They don't care about your technology. They care about the numbers." Jack had been nervous about Greg's arrival, but to his surprise, the consultant was exactly what they needed. He helped sharpen their financial projections, cutting through the fluff and focusing on what the utility company would care about most: cost efficiency, scalability, and long-term investment. By the time the proposal was ready, it was something the entire team could be proud of. It wasn't just the work of a single person or department. It was a culmination of Jack's financial expertise, the engineer's technical knowledge, and Greg's industry insight. They had forged an unlikely alliance, one that bridged the gap between business and technology, and it was stronger for it. When Jack presented the final proposal to Rachel, she gave him an approving nod. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "Good work, Jack." But even as Jack felt a rush of pride, he knew the real work was just beginning. The proposal had been submitted, but now came the waiting game. The negotiations, the back and forth with the utility company, and the pressure to deliver results. Jack had taken another leap, but the path ahead was still uncertain. One thing was for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. The weeks following the submission of the proposal felt like an eternity. Jack had thrown everything into it. Hours of hard work, sleepless nights, endless revisions. The team had put their heart and soul into the project, and now it was out of their hands. The waiting was agonizing. Rachel had warned him that the negotiation process with the utility company could take time, sometimes months. The energy industry was slow-moving, bogged down by red tape, legal processes, and internal power struggles that made even the smallest deal feel like a marathon. But that didn't make the wait any easier. As Jack sat at his desk one late afternoon, reviewing some new market trends, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it. Got an update from the utility company. They want a meeting next week to discuss the proposal in more detail. Be ready. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Jack felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was it, the moment they had been working for. The proposal had captured their attention. But now, it was up to EcoShift to make the case in person. Jack had learned a lot since joining the team, but this meeting was going to be different. It was a high-stakes conversation with a multi-billion-dollar company. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday in Chicago. Jack packed his bags, trying to focus on the positive, but the nerves continued to creep in. Would he be ready? Would he be able to handle the pressure? When Jack arrived at EcoShift's office that morning, Rachel was already there, looking as calm and collected as ever. She briefed Jack and the rest of the team on the company's strategy for the meeting. Everyone had a role to play, from the engineers to the marketing team, to Jack himself, who was tasked with handling the financial side of things. "Listen, Jack," Rachel said, her voice firm yet reassuring. "We've worked hard to get to this point, but now we need to put our best foot forward. We're not just presenting a proposal, we're presenting the future. The utility company needs to see that we can deliver results, both on a technical level and a financial one. You're the bridge. Don't just present numbers. Tell them why this matters." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words. This wasn't just about financial projections anymore. It was about selling a vision of clean energy's potential to transform cities and industries. He wasn't just speaking to numbers. He was speaking to people who had the power to change the world. The team flew out to Chicago the next morning. Jack was a bundle of nerves during the flight, his mind racing over every possible scenario. What if they didn't like the proposal? What if the utility company had concerns he hadn't anticipated? What if they were all wrong, and this entire venture was doomed to fail? The moment they arrived at the conference center, Jack tried to steady his nerves. He took a deep breath and reminded himself why he was there. He was part of something bigger now. He had pushed himself past the limits he once thought were unachievable. It didn't matter how nervous he felt. What mattered was that he had come this far. And now, it was time to see it through. The meeting was set in a sleek, glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. The team from the utility company was already seated around the large table when Jack and his colleagues entered. A few of the faces were familiar to him from earlier discussions, but there was one new face sitting at the head of the table, John Whitaker, the company's CEO. John was a towering figure in the industry, known for his aggressive negotiating tactics and no-nonsense attitude. Jack had read about him in industry journals. He had a reputation for being a tough leader, the kind who didn't entertain ideas unless they were backed by solid evidence. Rachel stood confidently at the front of the room. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today," she began. "We understand the importance of the decisions you're facing, and we're here to show you that EcoShift is the partner you need to build a sustainable future." She walked through the technical aspects of the proposal, outlining the company's ability to scale and adapt to the utility company's needs. Then it was Jack's turn. He stepped up to the front of the room, his palms slightly sweaty. His mind went blank for a moment as he glanced around the table, meeting the eyes of John Whitaker and the other executives. But he quickly recovered, focusing on the numbers he knew so well, the market projections, the potential ROI, the long-term savings that could be achieved by integrating EcoShift's technology. He outlined everything clearly, backing up his statements with hard data and charts that illustrated the savings over the next 10, 20, and even 30 years. The room was silent as he finished. Jack stood there for a moment, his heart racing, before he cleared his throat. Ultimately, it's not just about numbers, he said, his voice steady. It's about shaping a future that's more sustainable, more efficient, and more resilient. This proposal represents not only a business opportunity, it represents a chance to make a real difference in the world. There was a pause. Jack could feel the weight of the moment. He had laid it all out, the technical, the financial, the emotional appeal. Now, it was up to the utility company to decide whether or not they would take the plunge with EcoShift. John Whitaker was the first to speak. "You've given us a lot to think about," he said, his voice cold and measured. "We need to go over some details, but I can't say I'm not impressed. We'll let you know in the next week or so what our decision will be." Jack's stomach tightened. A week or so. It felt like an eternity. He had no idea what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing for sure. He had done everything he could. As the meeting ended, Rachel pulled Jack aside. "You did well," she said, her eyes reflecting approval. "You didn't just present the facts. You told them why it mattered. That's what we needed." Jack nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He had survived the meeting, but the real test was still ahead. After the high-stakes meeting in Chicago, Jack and the EcoShift team returned to their offices, but the victory was far from secured. The next few days felt like a blur. The sense of anticipation hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of how fragile everything was. For Jack, this was more than just about the proposal. It was about proving that he could not only keep up but also rise to the occasion when it mattered most. Rachel, ever the optimist, kept the team focused on moving forward, but Jack could sense the underlying tension. EcoShift had invested so much into this proposal, and if the utility company decided not to go forward with the partnership, it could set the company back months, if not years. Despite their collective optimism, the weight of uncertainty hung over Jack. His mind was consumed by the thought of the meeting and the potential fallout. He had done everything he could to sell the vision, but now the decision was out of his hands. And that, more than anything, was a bitter pill to swallow. His phone buzzed one morning as he was deep into market research. It was a message from Rachel. "We've just received confirmation. The utility company wants to meet again. They've narrowed it down to us and one other competitor. Prepare for round 2. Jack felt a rush of adrenaline as he reread the message. This was the break they had been waiting for. But there was no time to celebrate. This was the second round. If they didn't land the deal now, all the work and late nights would have been for nothing. Jack immediately felt the pressure mounting again. Over the next week, the team at EcoShift worked tirelessly to refine the proposal. It was a delicate balancing act. They needed to address the concerns the utility company had raised in the first meeting while reinforcing their core strengths. Rachel asked Jack to take a more prominent role in this round, focusing on showcasing EcoShift's financial viability and the long-term benefits of the partnership. "You've done well so far," Rachel said during their prep session. "But now, it's time to elevate your game. The utility company needs to see that we're not just another energy provider. We need to demonstrate that we're the future of clean energy." Jack wasn't sure if he was ready for the challenge, but he knew that stepping up was his only option. If he backed down now, it would be a sign of weakness. And EcoShift wasn't about weakness. Not anymore. As the date for the second meeting drew nearer, Jack spent every waking hour perfecting his pitch. He fine-tuned the financial models, updated projections, and collaborated with the engineering team to add any last-minute technical details that could make their proposal even stronger. There was no room for error this time. Every number had to be precise. Every argument had to be irrefutable. The night before the meeting, Jack found himself sitting alone in the office, staring at his computer screen, mentally rehearsing his lines. The office was quiet, with only the hum of the fluorescent lights breaking the silence. It was late, later than it should have been, but Jack couldn't bring himself to leave. He needed everything to be perfect. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah, the lead engineer he had worked closely with. "Hey Jack, just wanted to say good luck tomorrow. I know you've got this. The message was short, but it struck a chord with Jack. He realized how much he had grown in the past few months, not just as a professional, but as a person. He wasn't just a financial analyst anymore. He was part of the EcoShift family. He had earned their respect and trust, and they had earned his. With a deep breath, Jack closed his laptop and stood up. It was time to go home and get some rest. Tomorrow was the big day. The following morning, the team gathered at EcoShift's headquarters. There was an energy in the room that was palpable, an electric mixture of nerves and determination. Jack could sense that everyone was feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a business deal. This was a turning point for EcoShift. When the team arrived at the conference center for the second meeting, the atmosphere felt different. The utility company's executives were more serious, their faces less welcoming. John Whitaker, the CEO, was seated at the head of the table, but this time, there was no smile or casual banter. He was all business. "Thank you for coming again," Rachel began. "We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and discuss how EcoShift can be the partner you need to build a sustainable, scalable future." The meeting kicked off with an overview of EcoShift's capabilities, with each department offering their insights. Jack stood up when it was his turn, his heart racing. But this time, he didn't let the nerves take over. Instead, he focused on what they had accomplished and why they were the right choice. Last time, we focused on the basics, the numbers, the technology. But today, I want to talk about something deeper, Jack began, his voice steady. We're not just offering a product. We're offering a partnership. A partnership that doesn't just make financial sense. It's one that creates lasting change. We understand your needs, and we know that our technology can not only meet them but exceed them. This isn't just an investment in your company's future. This is an investment in the planet's future. Jack could feel the room's energy shift. The words seemed to land, resonating with the executives in a way that the first meeting hadn't. He talked about how the partnership wasn't just about short-term profits. It was about setting the groundwork for a cleaner, greener world. His focus wasn't just on data and projections, but on the bigger picture: sustainability, innovation, and the moral imperative of adopting renewable energy. When Jack finished, there was a brief silence in the room. John Whitaker finally spoke. "You've made a compelling case," he said, his voice low but measured. "We appreciate the vision you've laid out, but we still have some concerns about scalability and long-term costs." It wasn't the resounding endorsement Jack had hoped for, but it wasn't a rejection either. The conversation continued for hours, with the utility company's team probing deeper into EcoShift's financials, technology, and long-term viability. Jack held his ground, answering questions with confidence and precision, knowing that every word was crucial. As the meeting came to a close, John Whitaker stood up and extended his hand to Rachel. "We'll be in touch," he said. There was no immediate decision, but Jack couldn't help but feel like they were closer than ever. The road to the finish line was still uncertain, but they had made their case. And for the first time in months, Jack felt a deep sense of accomplishment. No matter the outcome, he knew they had given it everything they had. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Jack's phone rang. He was sitting at his desk, catching up on some of the market data that had piled up over the last few days. His mind kept drifting back to the second meeting with the utility company, the one that had felt so critical, but ultimately still left him hanging in suspense. His heart skipped a beat as he saw Rachel's name appear on the screen. "Jack," she said when he answered, her voice calm but with a slight edge of excitement, "get over here. We've got news." The urgency in her tone had Jack scrambling to grab his things. He barely remembered to shut down his computer before rushing out of his office. As he crossed the open floor of the EcoShift headquarters, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. Word had already spread that a decision was coming, and the tension was palpable. When Jack arrived in Rachel's office, the whole team was gathered around. Everyone was there: Sarah, Adam, even Greg, the external consultant. They all looked at him expectantly, their faces a mix of hope and anxiety. "Sit down, Jack," Rachel said, gesturing to the empty chair next to her. "I'll let you know what happened." Jack sat down, his palms sweaty. He tried to steady his breath, but his nerves were still rattling. "All right," Rachel began. "We just got off the phone with John Whitaker and the team from the utility company." Jack's heart pounded harder in his chest. This was it. They've made their decision, Rachel continued, pausing for a dramatic effect. And they've chosen EcoShift. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. Jack's eyes widened, and for a moment, he couldn't quite believe it. His mind raced to process the words Rachel had just said. "We've won?" Jack asked, his voice almost cracking as the realization hit him. Rachel smiled, a rare show of emotion. "Yes, they've agreed to partner with us. They're confident in our ability to scale, and they believe in the long-term vision we've laid out. This is the breakthrough we've all been working for." A cheer broke out around the room. Everyone was hugging each other, shaking hands, exchanging congratulations. But Jack remained seated for a moment, trying to let the news sink in. This was the moment he had been working toward since he first stepped through the doors of EcoShift. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone, ready to send a message to his family. They had all been there for him, supporting him through the sleepless nights, the doubts, and the endless uncertainty. But amidst the excitement, a lingering thought tugged at Jack's mind. The deal was done, but there were still challenges ahead. EcoShift wasn't out of the woods just yet. This partnership could be the beginning of something huge, but only if they could deliver. "Rachel, this is incredible," Jack said finally, turning back to face her. "But what's next? How do we ensure we keep the momentum going?" Rachel looked at him with a sense of seriousness that grounded the moment. "We celebrate tonight, Jack," she said, "but tomorrow we get to work. We need to start executing. This partnership is just the beginning. Now, we need to deliver on everything we've promised." Jack nodded. "Right. It's not over yet." Rachel's eyes softened. "No, it's not. But this is a huge win for EcoShift. And it's a huge win for you, Jack. You've proven yourself." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The team at EcoShift worked hard to finalize the details of the contract, ensuring that everything was lined up for the next phase of the project. Jack spent countless hours reviewing the legal terms and financial implications, always keeping an eye on the long-term goals they had set. Every decision felt more significant now that the deal was in place. They weren't just imagining success, they were living it. Despite the exhilaration, there were still moments of doubt. The enormity of what EcoShift had just accomplished was not lost on Jack. They had secured a partnership with one of the largest utility companies in the Midwest. The scope of the project was massive, and EcoShift was now at the forefront of an industry in flux. There was no going back. As Jack sat in his office one evening, he received an email from Greg, the external consultant who had been so integral to the proposal's success. The email was short but direct. "Congratulations, Jack. You've made it. But remember, the real work begins now. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture." Jack stared at the message for a moment. He had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The next few months would be critical. Every step of the implementation process would need to be executed flawlessly if they were to meet the expectations they had set. But for the first time in weeks, Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had done it. He stood up and walked to the window of his office, gazing out at the city skyline as the sun began to set. The view was breathtaking, an ever-changing tapestry of lights, buildings, and possibilities. EcoShift was no longer just an ambitious startup. They were on the map now, and Jack was right there with them, a vital part of the team that had made it happen. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from his mom. "So proud of you, Jack. I knew you had it in you. Can't wait to hear all the details." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. For all the doubts, all the late nights, and all the challenges, he had made it. And the future? Well, that was wide open. The next morning, EcoShift held a celebratory meeting with the entire company. Rachel thanked everyone for their hard work, pointing out specific contributions from team members who had gone above and beyond to make the partnership happen. Jack felt a sense of pride as Rachel acknowledged his role in the success of the proposal. It was rare for Rachel to single anyone out, but today was different. Today, Jack's hard work and dedication had earned him the recognition he deserved. "Jack has proven that he can think beyond the spreadsheets," Rachel said, smiling at him. "He understands what EcoShift stands for, and he's helped us push that vision forward." The applause that followed made Jack feel like he was finally part of something much larger than himself. For a moment, he let it all sink in. The long hours, the struggles, the challenges, and the victories. EcoShift wasn't just his job anymore. It was his purpose. But there was still much more to be done. The weeks that followed the announcement of EcoShift's partnership with the utility company were a whirlwind of excitement and hard work. The team, energized by their success, jumped into the implementation phase with the same enthusiasm that had carried them through the proposal process. Jack, still riding the high of their victory, dove into the details with a renewed sense of purpose. But as the reality of the task ahead set in, Jack began to realize just how much was at stake. They weren't just rolling out a small project. This was a major contract with a multi-billion-dollar utility company, and the expectations were sky-high. Every move EcoShift made would be scrutinized, and the pressure was mounting. This wasn't a time for mistakes. Jack spent long hours in meetings with the technical team, helping to refine the project's financial model and ensure that the implementation was as cost-effective as it was groundbreaking. He worked closely with Sarah, the lead engineer, to integrate the company's cutting-edge energy solutions into the utility company's existing infrastructure. It was a complex process, and Jack had to learn more than he ever thought he would about the technical aspects of the product. Despite his growing expertise, Jack still felt the weight of the challenge. He wasn't a technical expert, after all. He was the numbers guy. But as the stakes grew higher, he realized that his role was more than just balancing the books. He had to be a bridge between the engineers and the business side of things, helping both sides understand each other's needs and ensuring that EcoShift's vision stayed intact. One afternoon, Jack was sitting at his desk when Rachel stopped by. She had a look of determination on her face, but there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of concern. "Jack," she said, pulling up a chair, "we need to talk about the timeline. The utility company is putting a lot of pressure on us to deliver results faster than we anticipated." Jack straightened up in his chair, his mind immediately going to the project schedule. "What do you mean? We've set clear milestones, haven't we?" "We have," Rachel replied, "but they're pushing for an accelerated timeline. They want to start seeing results sooner than we planned. The problem is that we can't cut corners on this. If we rush things, we risk compromising the quality of the technology we're implementing, and that's something we can't afford." Jack nodded, his mind racing as he considered their options. "So, what's the solution? How do we make this work?" Rachel leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. "We need to figure out how to meet their demands without sacrificing the integrity of the project. I'm counting on you to help us find a way to make this happen. You're the one who understands the numbers, Jack. Can we afford to scale up the process without throwing off the budget?" Jack exhaled slowly. The pressure was mounting, and the clock was ticking. He couldn't help but wonder if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But he also knew that EcoShift had worked too hard to get to this point to back down now. "I'll get on it," Jack said, his voice steady, though his mind was a swirl of calculations and potential risks. "I'll work with the team to adjust the financial model and see if we can come up with a feasible plan." Rachel gave him a firm nod. "I know you can do it, but time's running out. We don't have much room to maneuver." As Rachel left his office, Jack felt a familiar wave of anxiety wash over him. There was no turning back now. The next few months would be the most challenging of his career. But despite the overwhelming weight of the task ahead, Jack couldn't shake the sense that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The next several days were filled with tense meetings, late nights, and endless brainstorming sessions. Jack worked tirelessly with the technical and engineering teams to find solutions. He reviewed budgets, assessed potential risks, and recalculated the project's financial feasibility with every new adjustment. Every time he thought they had a handle on the situation, another curveball came their way. But Jack wasn't about to let it derail them. He felt the pressure, but in a strange way, he thrived on it. This was the moment that would define EcoShift, and he knew that he couldn't afford to be anything less than his best. Every decision was critical, and every misstep could cost them everything. One evening, as he was going over the numbers for the fourth time that day, Jack received a call from Sarah. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Jack, I need you in the lab," she said. "There's something you need to see." Without hesitation, Jack grabbed his coat and headed to the lab. As he walked through the corridors of the office, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. What had gone wrong this time? When he arrived in the lab, Sarah was already there, standing next to one of the company's new prototype solar panels. The team had been working on improving their technology, and the results so far had been promising. But Sarah's face told a different story. What happened? Jack asked, his mind immediately racing to worst-case scenarios. It's the output, Sarah explained, her eyes focused on the data in front of them. We've hit a snag in the efficiency of the panels. They're not performing at the levels we expected. We're getting a 10% drop in output, and that's a problem. If we don't fix this soon, it could affect the entire timeline we've been working with. Jack's stomach dropped. A 10% drop in output was no small issue. It could derail everything they had worked for, especially with the utility company expecting results on a much tighter timeline than they had originally planned. Can we fix it? Jack asked, his voice strained with concern. Sarah nodded, but it was clear that it would take time. We're working on a fix, but it's going to require a major redesign of certain components. It's not something we can do overnight. Jack stood there for a moment, processing the information. It was a critical setback, but it wasn't insurmountable. They had time to fix it, but it would require focus, dedication, and a lot of long hours. The question was, could they fix it in time to meet the utility company's expectations? All right, Jack said, his voice determined. We need to bring in every resource we can. I want everyone in on this. No more delays. Sarah gave him a solemn nod. We'll make it work, Jack. We have no choice. Jack turned to leave the lab, his mind already working through the numbers and potential adjustments. There was no time to waste. The clock was ticking, and they had a big problem to solve. The next few days were a blur of frenzied activity. Jack was no longer just a financial analyst. He had become a full-fledged project manager, overseeing multiple moving parts and trying to keep everything together as the pressure from the utility company intensified. The efficiency issue with the solar panels wasn't something they could easily brush aside. It required a complete redesign of several key components, and the team was working around the clock to make improvements. Sarah and her engineering team were pulling all-nighters, while Jack coordinated with the finance team to adjust budgets and timelines. Every day seemed to bring new complications, new hurdles to overcome. But Jack was determined to make it work. EcoShift's reputation was on the line, not just as a company, but as a beacon for the future of clean energy. If they couldn't solve this issue in time, it could mean the end of their breakthrough partnership with the utility company. And Jack wasn't about to let that happen. One morning, just as Jack was reviewing the updated project timeline, Rachel called him into her office. Her expression was grave, and her tone serious. Jack, we need to talk, Rachel began, her voice tight with tension. The utility company has requested an update on the project's progress. They're pushing for results. They want to know if we're going to meet the revised timeline. Jack took a deep breath. How much time do we have left? Rachel sighed, looking at the project milestones. We're behind schedule, a few weeks behind. And with the issues we're facing with the solar panels, we need to show them that we have a concrete plan to resolve it. They're already questioning our ability to deliver. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The last thing EcoShift needed was to show weakness in front of the utility company now. They had come too far, invested too much, to let something like this derail everything. We can still fix this, Jack said, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. But we need to be transparent with them. If we're upfront about the issue and show them the steps we're taking to resolve it, we might buy some time. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I agree, but we need to be sure we can deliver. We don't have room for another setback. As Jack left Rachel's office, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had been working non-stop, barely finding time to eat or sleep. But now, he was more determined than ever to make sure that EcoShift didn't just survive this challenge. They needed to come out stronger. That afternoon, Jack and Sarah worked together to draft a detailed report for the utility company, explaining the issue with the solar panels and outlining the steps they were taking to correct the problem. They provided updated timelines, cost projections, and a roadmap for the next few weeks. It was the most detailed and transparent communication they had sent the utility company yet. We can't afford to hide anything, Jack said as he reviewed the document. They need to know exactly what's going on. I agree, Sarah replied, her brow furrowed as she looked over the numbers. But if we can fix this in the next 2 weeks, we'll still be on track. It'll be tight, but we can make it work. Jack nodded, but the tightness in his chest remained. The stakes had never been higher. He knew that any mistake, any further delay, would risk everything. After sending the report, Jack spent the rest of the day in meetings with the technical team, checking on progress and making sure that everyone was aligned. The hours blurred together, and before he knew it, the sun was setting, and the office was growing quiet. But Jack didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when so much was on the line. The next day, the call from the utility company came earlier than expected. Jack, we've reviewed your report, John Whitaker, the CEO of the utility company, said, his voice calm but firm. We appreciate your transparency, but we need to know when you'll have a definitive solution. We're working on tight timelines here, and we can't afford to wait much longer. Jack took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. We're working around the clock to fix the issue. We've updated the design, and we're confident we'll have the solution within 2 weeks. We're committed to delivering the best possible results, and we're taking every step necessary to make sure the project meets your expectations. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Jack feared that Whitaker would call it off. But then he spoke again. We're giving you those 2 weeks, Jack. But after that, we'll need to see results. No more delays. Jack's heart raced, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. Understood. You'll have our results in 2 weeks. Good. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Jack sat back in his chair, his hands shaking. They had been given a lifeline, but it was a narrow one. 2 weeks. That was all they had. The next 2 weeks were an intense blur of activity. Jack barely left the office, working side by side with the engineers and the finance team to track every development, adjust budgets, and keep things moving forward. The solar panel redesign was underway, and the efficiency issues were slowly improving. Sarah and her team were working tirelessly, but Jack knew the window of time they had to make things right was closing fast. By the end of the second week, they were finally ready to present their progress. The solar panels were back on track, with efficiency levels nearly meeting the original targets. But it wasn't just the technical issues they had to address. The utility company wanted to know that EcoShift was still capable of handling the full scope of the project. Jack gathered his team for one final meeting before the presentation. Everyone was exhausted, but they were also proud of what they had accomplished in such a short amount of time. We've made it this far, Jack said, his voice firm but filled with pride. But the job isn't done yet. Today, we show the utility company that we can deliver. We've made the necessary adjustments, and we're on track. Now it's time to prove it. With a renewed sense of determination, EcoShift's team prepared for the most important meeting of their lives. Jack knew that everything was riding on this moment. The partnership, the future of EcoShift, and the success of their groundbreaking work in the clean energy sector. It was all on the line. The tension in the EcoShift office was palpable as the team prepared for the most critical presentation of their careers. Jack stood in front of the conference room, pacing back and forth, his mind running through the moment that would determine whether EcoShift could deliver on the promise they had made. Everyone in the room was exhausted. There was no hiding it, but the determination in their eyes was undeniable. After weeks of working around the clock to resolve the efficiency issues with the solar panels, Jack could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But he had no intention of backing down. Not now. Not when they were so close to proving themselves. Rachel, Sarah, Adam, and Greg. All of them had been integral to getting to this point. They had all given everything to make this project a success, and Jack knew that this was their chance to finally show the utility company and the world that EcoShift was more than just a promising startup. They were a force to be reckoned with. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. We're almost ready. Stay focused, Jack. We've got this. Jack took a deep breath, nodding to himself. He had always known this would be the hardest part of the journey, but he was ready. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and at exactly 9:55, the EcoShift team was gathered in the conference room, laptops open and notes ready. Jack stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped in front of him, trying to mask the butterflies in his stomach. He had been through countless presentations in his career, but this one felt different. This one mattered more than any of the others combined. As the clock struck 10 o'clock, the door opened, and John Whitaker, CEO of the utility company, walked in, flanked by his team of senior executives. Their stern faces gave nothing away, but Jack could sense the weight of the moment. These people had the power to make or break EcoShift. The air was thick with anticipation. "Good morning, everyone," Rachel said, standing up to greet them with a smile. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today." John Whitaker nodded curtly, and the others took their seats. Jack could feel their eyes on him, and he straightened his posture. He had prepared for this moment for weeks. There was no turning back now. "Shall we begin?" Rachel asked, turning to Jack. Jack took a deep breath and clicked a button on his laptop, bringing up the first slide of their presentation. The screen behind him displayed a sleek, professional graphic of EcoShift's logo and the utility company's logo, side by side. It was the beginning of the partnership they had all been working toward. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity to present our progress," Jack began, his voice steady. "As you know, we've been working tirelessly to resolve the efficiency issues with our solar panels. Over the past 2 weeks, we've made significant progress, and we're confident that we can meet the revised timeline without compromising quality." Jack moved to the next slide, which showed the updated data on the solar panels' efficiency levels. The numbers were clear, and the improvements spoke for themselves. The gap in performance had been closed, and the team had found a solution that kept the project within budget. "Our engineering team, led by Sarah here, has worked around the clock to redesign key components of the panels," Jack continued. "We've successfully increased the output by 9.5%, which brings us to a level that's close to our initial target." Sarah, sitting next to Jack, stood up and added, "In addition to that, we've implemented several improvements to the system's scalability. We're confident that the technology will continue to perform at or above expectations as we roll it out." Jack watched as John Whitaker and the other executives studied the data. Their faces were impassive, but Jack knew that every detail mattered. He needed them to see the effort and dedication that had gone into this project. "Impressive," Whitaker said after a long pause. "But we need to hear more about the timeline. Can you meet the deadlines we've set, given the recent setbacks?" Jack's heart raced. This was the critical question, the one that would determine everything. But he was prepared. "We've recalibrated our timeline," Jack said, pulling up the next slide. "We're now on track to complete the initial phase within the next 4 weeks. We've also accounted for any potential risks that may arise, and we're confident that we can stay on schedule from here on out." Rachel chimed in. "We've already made adjustments to our internal processes to ensure that we're operating at maximum efficiency. Our team is fully aligned, and we're more than ready to move forward." The room was silent for a moment, and Jack could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on them. This was it. He had put everything on the line to make this happen. Now it was up to the utility company to decide whether they would move forward with EcoShift, or if everything they had worked for would come crashing down. Finally, Whitaker spoke again, his voice low but decisive. "We're giving you the green light," he said. "The utility company is confident in your ability to deliver. The adjustments you've made to the technology are impressive, and we believe you can meet the revised timeline. We're excited to move forward with the next phase." Jack's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. They had done it. They had pulled it off. Rachel was the first to respond, her voice full of relief and excitement. "Thank you, John. We're grateful for your trust. We won't let you down." Whitaker nodded, a slight smile breaking through his usually serious expression. "I'm looking forward to seeing the results. Let's make this work." As the meeting came to a close, Jack felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but this was the victory they had been waiting for. EcoShift had secured the utility company's commitment, and now they could finally move forward with the implementation. Walking out of the conference room with Rachel and the rest of the team, Jack felt lighter than he had in weeks. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel the weight of success. Rachel clapped him on the back. "We did it, Jack. You were right. We pulled it off." Jack smiled, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There would be more hurdles ahead, more challenges to face. But for now, they had proven themselves. EcoShift had not only survived but thrived, and Jack was more determined than ever to see this project through to the end. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The relief from their success in securing the utility company's commitment was brief but sweet. Jack spent the next few days reflecting on what they had just accomplished, trying to process how far they had come since the early days of EcoShift. The pressure had been intense, but now they had a chance to build on that momentum. However, Jack knew that this victory was just the start of a much bigger journey. The real work, actually executing the project, was now in full swing. The utility company wanted results, and EcoShift was determined to deliver. The next phase would require even more precision, more effort, and more collaboration than ever before. The following week, the team gathered at EcoShift's headquarters for a strategy meeting. They had already celebrated their success, but now it was time to get down to business. The utility company was watching, and Jack knew they couldn't afford to miss a beat. He sat at the head of the table, a sense of calm determination settling in. Everyone else seemed to be on edge, fidgeting with papers, checking their laptops, exchanging nervous glances, but Jack had learned to keep his cool. This was the moment they had been working toward for years, and now it was finally within reach. Rachel started the meeting with a quick review of where they stood. As you all know, we've secured the green light from the utility company. But there are still significant challenges ahead. We need to ensure that we meet their revised timeline and deliver the results they expect. That means ramping up production, finalizing the technology, and staying ahead of any potential risks. Jack could sense the weight of the task settling in on everyone's shoulders, but he was ready to tackle it head-on. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room. "I know it's been a whirlwind, but we've come a long way," Jack said, his voice steady. "Now, we're entering the most critical phase. We need to stay focused. Every decision we make over the next few months is going to have a direct impact on the success of this project. But I believe in this team, and I believe we're capable of handling it." Sarah, who had been quiet until now, nodded in agreement. "The solar panel efficiency has been improved, and the redesign is nearly complete. We've also streamlined the installation process, which will allow us to meet the deadline without compromising quality." Jack looked at the data on the screen in front of him, nodding. The numbers looked good, better than they had expected, even. But Jack knew they couldn't rest on their laurels. The utility company wasn't just investing in a product, they were investing in EcoShift's ability to deliver on a promise. "We've got a long road ahead of us, but we're on the right track," Jack said. "We'll need to keep adjusting as we go. We'll need to monitor everything carefully and be prepared for any unforeseen challenges. But if we stick together and stay focused, we'll make this happen." The team spent the next few hours refining their plans. Jack worked closely with Sarah and the engineering team to ensure that all the pieces were falling into place, while Rachel and Greg focused on refining the budget and timelines. They had made significant progress, but there were still several hurdles to overcome. When the meeting finally ended, Jack stayed behind, poring over the numbers one last time. There was always something else to consider, another adjustment to make, but he had to trust that they were ready. They had been given a second chance, and they couldn't afford to let it slip away. As the weeks passed, the EcoShift team began to hit their stride. They worked tirelessly to meet every milestone, making adjustments as needed and tackling problems head-on. The utility company's representatives were kept in the loop, and Jack made sure that their concerns were addressed quickly and thoroughly. Despite the steady progress, Jack couldn't help but notice a growing sense of pressure within the team. Everyone was working at full capacity, pushing their limits to make sure everything was on schedule. Jack knew that burnout was a real threat, and he had to find a way to keep morale high. He took it upon himself to check in with each member of the team, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that they were on the verge of something monumental. Jack understood that success wasn't just about the final product. It was about the people who made it happen. One evening, as Jack was leaving the office, he received a message from Sarah. "We've hit another snag with the panel design. The system's heat tolerance isn't where it needs to be." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. They had been so close to ironing out all the issues, and now this. But Jack wasn't about to give up. He immediately called Sarah. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of concern. "It's the heat tolerance," Sarah explained. "The panels are performing great in normal conditions, but we've noticed that they're starting to degrade faster than expected when exposed to extreme temperatures. It's not a huge issue yet, but if we don't fix it now, it could affect the long-term performance." Jack felt a surge of frustration. They had worked so hard to get to this point, and now this. But he pushed the frustration aside, focusing on the solution. "Okay, what's the fix?" Jack asked, determined to find a way forward. "We're going to need to make a few more modifications to the material composition," Sarah explained. "It will take some time, but we can get it done. The good news is that it's not a design flaw, just an adjustment we need to make to optimize performance." Jack exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision. This was the kind of problem that could cost them valuable time, but it was better to fix it now than face bigger problems down the road. "Let's do it," Jack said firmly. "We need to make sure that everything is perfect before we go forward. We don't cut corners. I'll work with the finance team to adjust the budget and timeline accordingly." By the time they resolved the heat tolerance issue, Jack's sense of urgency had reached new heights. Each new challenge was met with a mixture of determination and anxiety. The clock was ticking, and EcoShift had to prove they were capable of delivering a flawless solution. In the midst of the chaos, Jack found solace in the thought that they were on the brink of something revolutionary. They had set out to change the world with their technology, and now they were finally about to make it happen. But as he sat in his office late one night, staring at the screen, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. There were forces beyond the project at work. Forces that would test not just their technology, but their integrity, their values, and their ability to stay true to the mission. What would happen when the true cost of success came due? Could EcoShift survive the pressure, or would they crumble under the weight of their ambition? Only time would tell. The weeks continued to pass in a blur of progress, adjustments, and setbacks. Despite the long hours and the growing pressure, EcoShift's team was more committed than ever to seeing the project through to the end. Each new hurdle they faced was met with determination, but Jack couldn't help but notice the toll it was taking on everyone, himself included. Sarah's team had finally nailed down the heat tolerance issue with the solar panels, but the next challenge came swiftly, an unexpected complication with the supply chain. The company that EcoShift had partnered with for key materials had fallen behind schedule. It was another blow that threatened to derail the project and push their timeline back once more. Jack received the news early one morning while he was sipping coffee at his desk. He hadn't even finished his first cup when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Greg, the supply chain manager. "We've hit a major snag with the material supply. The shipment is delayed, and it's going to push us back by at least 2 weeks. We need to figure out how to adjust." Jack groaned, setting the coffee cup down and rubbing his temples. It felt like one thing after another. Every step forward was immediately followed by a step back. This latest delay was especially frustrating because it was something completely outside their control. The utility company had been clear. They wanted results, and they wanted them on time. They had already given EcoShift an extension after the solar panel efficiency issues, and Jack feared they wouldn't be as lenient this time. He immediately called Greg. "Talk to me," Jack said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the rising frustration. "The supplier's factory had a technical issue, and the shipment isn't going to arrive for at least 2 weeks, Greg explained. "We're doing everything we can to get things back on track, but this is a major setback." Jack exhaled sharply, pacing the length of his office. "We can't afford another delay. Not with everything on the line. Is there any way we can source the materials elsewhere? We need to keep things moving. I'm checking with a few other suppliers, but the problem is that the materials we need are highly specialized. If we go with someone else, it'll cost us a lot more, and the quality might not be up to our standards." Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just a matter of cost, it was a matter of credibility. If they couldn't deliver on their promises, the utility company would pull out, and EcoShift's reputation could be shattered. He made a decision in that moment. There was no time to waste. Get on the phone with everyone. Find another supplier, even if it costs us more. We don't have a choice. We'll make the numbers work. Greg hesitated for a moment. "Got it. I'll keep you updated. For the rest of the day, Jack found himself caught in a whirlwind of meetings. He was still trying to keep his head above water, dealing with the technical team, finance, and now the supply chain issues. The weight of everything seemed to be getting heavier with every passing minute. By the end of the day, he was physically and mentally exhausted. As he walked out of the office, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Rachel. "Jack, we need to talk," Rachel said, her voice tight with concern. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice weary. "I've been speaking with the utility company," Rachel began, "and they're starting to ask tough questions. They want to know how we're managing the delays. We've had a few setbacks already, and they're getting impatient." Jack rubbed his forehead, trying to stave off the headache that had been building throughout the day. "I know. We're doing everything we can to make it work. I'm handling the supply chain issue right now, but they won't understand that we're not the ones causing the delays. They'll only see the missed deadlines." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "What happens if we don't deliver, Jack? We're getting to a point where the utility company might pull the plug. I'm not sure how much more they're willing to tolerate." That sentence hit Jack harder than he'd expected. He had always known the risks involved in this project, but hearing Rachel lay it out so plainly made everything feel real. The stakes had never been higher. "We can't afford to fail," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure we don't. We just have to get through this." Rachel let out a soft sigh. "Just don't burn yourself out, okay? We need you to stay sharp, Jack. The team is relying on you." Jack nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see him. "I know. I won't let you down." As the days dragged on, Jack felt the pressure mounting. Every decision seemed to carry more weight than the last. Despite the team's tireless efforts, it felt as though the world was conspiring against them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Greg called with good news. "We've found a new supplier," Greg said, his voice upbeat. "They can meet our specs, and while it'll be more expensive, we'll be able to get the materials on time. It'll cost us, but it'll keep us on track for the utility company's timeline." Jack allowed himself a breath of relief. "Great. Get the order placed. We'll make it work." The weight on his shoulders lightened a little, but there was still the looming question of how the utility company would respond to yet another setback. He knew that any further delays would be disastrous. A week later, as Jack prepared to meet with the utility company again, he found himself wondering if they could truly make it. Could they really deliver everything they had promised, or had they already reached their breaking point? Every step forward seemed to be met with a new challenge, and Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that one more setback might be the end of the road. When the day of the presentation finally arrived, Jack entered the conference room with the same steely resolve that had carried him through so many sleepless nights. This time, however, his heart was pounding louder than usual, and his palms were sweaty despite his best efforts to remain calm. The utility company's executives sat across from him, their faces as inscrutable as ever. Jack wasn't sure what to expect this time around, but he knew one thing for sure: their patience was wearing thin. Rachel began the meeting by updating them on the progress EcoShift had made over the past few weeks. Jack followed, outlining the steps they had taken to resolve the supply chain issues and the measures they had implemented to stay on schedule. "Despite the delays, we're on track," Jack said, his voice steady. "We've found new suppliers, and we're committed to meeting the revised deadlines." The silence in the room was deafening. The utility company executives exchanged looks, but none of them spoke. Finally, John Whitaker, the CEO, leaned forward. His expression was unreadable. "We've been patient with you, Jack," Whitaker said, his voice low, "but patience has its limits. You've had setbacks, but you've also shown resilience. The question now is, can you deliver?" Jack looked around the room at his team, each one of them exhausted but resolute. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. "We will deliver," Jack said, his voice firm, as the weight of the moment hung in the air. "You have my word." The days that followed the meeting with the utility company were tense. Jack felt the pressure of the promises he had made, the commitment to deliver on time, and the looming threat of failure if they couldn't meet the utility company's demands. The clock was ticking, and every day that passed brought them closer to the critical deadline. Despite the new supplier stepping in to help with the material delays, there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. EcoShift's engineers worked tirelessly to meet the revised production schedules, but it seemed like new challenges were always popping up. A small technical glitch with one of the components in the solar panels delayed the assembly process for several days. Another day was lost when a last-minute adjustment was required for the installation infrastructure. As the project progressed, Jack could sense a shift in the team's morale. People were working harder than ever before, but exhaustion was starting to take its toll. Even Jack himself was feeling it. His nights were shorter, his mind racing constantly, and the weight of it all was beginning to show on his face. One evening, as Jack sat in his office going over data and reports, Sarah stopped by his door. She knocked softly before entering, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, stepping into the room. Jack glanced up from his desk and tried to offer a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just thinking through some things." Sarah crossed the room and sat down across from him. "Look, I know we're all feeling the pressure, but you've been pushing yourself harder than anyone else, Jack. The team sees it. We all appreciate it, but you're running on fumes." "I'm fine," Jack replied quickly, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. He was far from fine. The stress, the long hours, the constant pressure to deliver, it was all beginning to take a toll. Sarah didn't let up. "No, you're not. And I know you're trying to keep it all together for the team. But if you burn out, everything else falls apart. You've got to take a break, even if it's just for a few hours." Jack leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He knew she was right. The weight of the entire project, and the fate of EcoShift, felt like it was resting solely on his shoulders. But there was no time to rest. They were so close to the finish line, and he couldn't afford to slow down now. "I don't have time for a break," Jack muttered. "Not now. We're almost there, Sarah. I can't risk it." Sarah's gaze softened, but she didn't back down. "Look, I get it. But you've got a team that's here for you. We're all in this together. If you don't step back, even just for a minute, you're going to miss something important. Trust me." Jack stared at her, knowing she was right. He couldn't keep pushing himself like this forever. After a long pause, he finally nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Maybe I'll take a break tonight. Just a little one." Sarah smiled, satisfied with his response. "Good. You deserve it. And tomorrow, we'll be back at it together." Later that night, Jack forced himself to leave the office earlier than usual. He took a walk around the city, trying to clear his mind. The crisp night air was a small but welcome relief, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. For a brief moment, he felt a sense of clarity, of being able to see beyond the immediate obstacles. But that clarity was short-lived. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Rachel. "We need to talk. Urgent." Jack's stomach dropped. He immediately called her back. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's the utility company," Rachel said, her tone tight. "They've sent an official notice. They're putting EcoShift on probation. They've heard about the delays, and they're not happy. If we don't meet the next deadline, if we don't show tangible progress, they'll pull out." Jack's mind raced as he processed the words. "Probation? What does that mean for us?" "It means that the next phase is make or break," Rachel explained. "If we don't prove we can meet the revised timeline, it's over. They're already looking at other companies to step in if we fail." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close, and yet now they were facing the very real possibility of losing everything. "We'll make it," Jack said, his voice firm despite the panic rising inside him. "We'll finish this. We just need to rally the team and push through. We can't let this slip." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then spoke with quiet urgency. "Jack, I know you're doing everything you can, but I'm starting to think that the utility company might not be as flexible as we hope. We need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario, just in case." Jack's mind reeled. "What are you suggesting?" "Maybe it's time to consider a contingency plan," Rachel said. "We need a backup strategy in case they pull the plug. We can't rely solely on their good faith." Jack knew she was right. They had to prepare for the possibility that things wouldn't go as planned. But he refused to give in to the thought of failure just yet. They had come too far to let this project collapse now. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But we're not giving up. Not while there's a chance to fix this." The next few days were a blur of frantic efforts to meet the latest deadline. Jack and his team worked tirelessly, putting in long hours to get everything in place. They continued to push the limits of what they could achieve, often at the expense of their own well-being. Sarah and the rest of the engineering team were in constant communication, troubleshooting issues and making adjustments on the fly. Greg worked around the clock to ensure the supply chain stayed intact, making sure all materials arrived on time and were up to the standards they needed. But despite all their hard work, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were on the edge of a precipice. Each new setback, each complication, was adding another layer of pressure to an already fragile situation. Finally, the day came for the utility company's final inspection. The team had worked nonstop to meet every requirement, and now it was time to prove they could deliver. The executives from the utility company arrived, their expressions guarded as they observed the progress. Jack stood at the front, trying to maintain his composure. His stomach was in knots, but he knew that this was the moment that would define everything. "We've made every adjustment," Jack said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "The technology is ready. The infrastructure is set. All that's left is for you to see the results." The utility company executives exchanged glances before one of them, John Whitaker, stepped forward. He looked at Jack, then at the team, before finally speaking. "We're watching," Whitaker said, his tone even. "Show us what you've got." The tension in the air was palpable as the utility company's executives, including John Whitaker, stood before Jack and his team, ready to witness the culmination of months of hard work. Every person in the room knew that this moment would decide EcoShift's fate and possibly the future of the entire company. Jack's palms were sweating, and though he tried to keep his composure, the weight of the moment was heavier than ever before. "This is it," Sarah whispered to Jack as they walked to the front of the room together, where the solar panels and energy systems were now fully installed. "We've got one shot at this." Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. Let's make it count." He turned to face the group of utility executives. "What you're about to see isn't just the result of our technology. It's the result of a team that believes in what we're doing. We've pushed ourselves beyond the limits to make sure everything is perfect. Now, it's time to prove it." With that, Sarah activated the control panel, and the room filled with the soft hum of the solar arrays coming online. The bright, artificial lights of the room dimmed slightly as the new system drew power, and the solar panels, now fully integrated, began to hum with energy. Jack watched closely, waiting for any sign of malfunction or instability. He knew how fragile this moment was. The slightest hiccup could mean disaster, and it wouldn't just be a failure. It would be the end of EcoShift's ambitions. The minutes stretched out like hours as the systems came to life, feeding data back to the monitors on the wall. The energy production numbers ticked higher, confirming what Jack had hoped for. Everything was functioning as planned. No glitches. No problems. John Whitaker's eyes narrowed as he studied the readouts. The other executives remained silent, watching intently. Jack's heart raced as he tried to read their expressions. It was hard to tell whether they were impressed or simply waiting for something to go wrong. As the systems continued to run smoothly, Jack took a cautious step forward, ready to speak. "This is just the beginning," Jack said, his voice strong despite the uncertainty still lingering in the air. "With this technology, we're not just meeting the energy needs of today, we're preparing for the energy needs of the future. This system is scalable, adaptable, and built to last. It's not just a project for us, it's a revolution." John Whitaker finally looked up from the monitor, his gaze meeting Jack's. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Jack's pulse quickened as he waited for the utility company's leader to speak. "You've done it," Whitaker said, his voice cool but deliberate. "This technology works. I have to admit, I wasn't sure we would get here, but I see now that I was wrong. You've delivered." A collective sigh of relief seemed to wash over the room. The team exchanged glances, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. They had done it. After all the late nights, the endless setbacks, In the relentless pressure, they had delivered. But, Whitaker added, his voice taking on a more serious tone, this isn't the end. We need to see this system in action under real-world conditions. We need a pilot program, and we need to monitor this system for several months to ensure it can handle the full load. We're not signing any contracts just yet. The air grew heavy again. Jack felt his stomach drop, the weight of the words sinking in. Despite everything, they weren't out of the woods yet. The utility company was willing to move forward, but with significant caution. Understood, Jack replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. We're ready for that. We've designed this system to be adaptable, and we'll be with you every step of the way as it gets tested in real-world environments. John Whitaker nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. Good. We'll need to finalize the details, but I'll be in touch soon. If the pilot program is successful, we'll talk about scaling it up. If not, the unspoken threat hung in the air. Jack didn't need to hear the rest. He knew what would happen if the system failed now. It would all be over. As the meeting ended, Jack and his team stood together in the conference room, processing what had just happened. While they had won this battle, the war was far from over. The pilot program would be their next test, and it was one they couldn't afford to fail. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. EcoShift's team worked tirelessly to finalize the system for the pilot program. The utility company's executives had promised to return once the system was fully deployed in a small-scale setting, and now it was up to Jack and his team to ensure that everything went smoothly. Sarah and her engineering team made final adjustments to the system's performance metrics, ensuring that it could handle real-time fluctuations in energy demand. Greg worked around the clock to make sure that the supply chain remained intact, dealing with logistical nightmares to get the necessary components in place. Jack did his best to keep the team motivated, but he could sense that the pressure was beginning to wear on everyone. The energy in the office had shifted. People were more withdrawn, less vocal. They had poured everything into this project, and now they were running on empty. Jack himself was no exception. Sleep had become a luxury, and every decision felt like it carried the weight of the world. He hadn't had a full night's rest in weeks, and the toll was becoming evident. His eyes were bloodshot, his focus wavering. Despite all this, he kept his resolve. The pilot program had to succeed. There was no room for failure. The day of the pilot program arrived, and Jack stood in front of the site where the new system was being tested. The utility company's executives were present, their presence a reminder of how high the stakes were. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny. "This is it," Sarah said, standing next to him as they observed the setup. "The next few hours will determine everything." Jack nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. "I know. We've done everything we can. Now we just need to watch and wait." The system powered up, the hum of the solar arrays filling the air as they began to collect energy from the sun. Data streamed across the monitors, and Jack's pulse quickened as he watched. Everything had to go perfectly. For the next few hours, they monitored the system, making adjustments where needed and ensuring everything was operating within the specified parameters. The system performed flawlessly, and as the sun began to set, Jack finally allowed himself to exhale. "This is working," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with awe. Jack nodded, but his mind was still racing. "It's working, but it's not over yet." As the pilot program wrapped up, the utility company executives gathered their things, preparing to leave. Jack stepped forward to meet them, his heart in his throat. "Is everything satisfactory?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice calm. John Whitaker's face was inscrutable. He studied the data for a moment before looking up at Jack. "You've passed the first test," Whitaker said slowly. "This is a step forward, but we'll need to monitor it for a few more weeks before we make a final decision. But I can say this, we're impressed." Jack exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. They had done it. For the moment, they had succeeded. But as he watched the utility company's team walk away, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their battle wasn't over yet. There was still more to prove, and the final test was just around the corner. The days following the pilot program were filled with a nerve-wracking tension that hung over EcoShift like a dark cloud. Jack and his team had done everything they could to make the project a success. The system was working, the data was solid, and the utility company's executives had shown a level of interest that hadn't been there before. But none of that meant the deal was done. Not yet. The promise of a few more weeks of monitoring felt like an eternity. Jack found it difficult to focus on anything else. The clock was ticking, but it was as though time had slowed to a crawl. Every phone call, every email, every unexpected knock on his office door sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. What if this was the call he had been waiting for? What if it was the news he dreaded? Jack tried to distract himself by meeting with his team, discussing future developments and potential upgrades to the solar system, but the undercurrent of uncertainty made it impossible to fully engage. Everyone else felt it too. The sense of anticipation was palpable, and it weighed heavily on the entire office. One afternoon, Jack received an unexpected visit from Rachel. She had been quiet lately, dealing with the company's internal affairs and working with the investors to keep the financial side of things afloat. But today, her face looked more tired than usual, her eyes carrying the weight of her own worries. "Hey," Jack greeted her as she walked into his office, offering her a weary smile. "You look like you could use a coffee." "Maybe a strong one," Rachel replied, rubbing her temples. "We need to talk." Jack's stomach clenched. "About the pilot?" Rachel nodded. "Sort of. But also about the bigger picture. We need to prepare for the next phase of this, Jack. If we want this to work, we need to know what happens next, whether it's good or bad." Jack's heart raced. He'd been hoping for good news, but the reality of the situation was that they couldn't afford to be blindsided by any more surprises. "I'm all ears," he said, motioning for her to sit down. Rachel sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I've been talking with the investors, and to be blunt, they're starting to get nervous. They see the potential in this technology, but they're not ready to throw more money at a project that's still in the testing phase. They want to see more progress, and they want it fast." Jack felt a pang of frustration, but he kept his voice steady. They knew what they were signing up for. This isn't something we can rush. We have to prove that the system can handle the demands of the real world, and that takes time. Rachel nodded, but her expression was serious. "I get it, but here's the thing. The utility company hasn't exactly been forthcoming with how they'll move forward after the pilot. They've been non-committal, and if they're not ready to sign on the dotted line, we could find ourselves in a holding pattern for months. The investors won't wait that long." Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we look for other options," Rachel said bluntly. "If the utility company doesn't come through, we need to have a backup plan. We can't put all our eggs in one basket." Jack knew what she meant. If the utility company didn't sign off on the project after the pilot program, they would be left with little more than an impressive proof of concept. But without a major partner, they would struggle to secure the funding needed to scale the project. "We're already juggling so many things," Jack said, rubbing his face in frustration. "The team's stretched thin, the pressure's mounting from all sides, and now we're talking about finding new investors or partners. I don't know how we can handle any more." Rachel leaned forward. "I know it's a lot, Jack, but we can't wait for a lifeline that may never come. We need to take control of our future. And if that means looking outside of the utility company, then we have to do it." Jack was silent for a long moment, processing her words. He knew she was right, but the idea of venturing into new partnerships, finding new investors, and pushing forward without the certainty of the utility company's support was daunting. Still, EcoShift couldn't afford to stand still. If they weren't going to get the utility company's endorsement, they would have to go elsewhere. "You're right," Jack said finally, determination creeping back into his voice. "We can't afford to wait. Let's start looking at options." Rachel gave him a nod, clearly relieved. "I'll reach out to some of the contacts I've been working with. We'll see if there's anyone who might be interested in backing us." In the days that followed, the tension in the office only grew. Jack knew that his team was still focused on the pilot program, making sure that the system continued to run smoothly and providing the utility company with all the data they requested. But behind the scenes, Jack and Rachel were quietly exploring other avenues. They contacted potential investors, explored other utilities that might be interested in a partnership, and even considered expanding the technology to new markets. Jack found himself juggling an increasing number of calls, emails, and meetings. The future of EcoShift was now riding on two separate tracks, one with the utility company and one with new partners who might see the value in their technology. It was exhausting. Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd had a full night of sleep. He was on the phone constantly, staying up late to write emails, and rushing from one meeting to the next. The burden of leading his company through this crisis weighed on him more than ever. Finally, the call came. Jack's phone rang late one evening as he sat in his office, staring at the project timeline. He glanced down at the screen and saw that it was John Whitaker from the utility company. His heart skipped a beat. This was it. He had no idea what was coming on the other end, but this call would determine everything. Jack, Whitaker's voice came through the line, calm but firm. We've reviewed the data from the pilot program. We're impressed with the results. The system performed as expected under controlled conditions. Jack felt a surge of hope rise within him, but he held back, waiting for the rest. But, Whitaker continued, we're going to need more time. We need a few more months to evaluate the system under full operational conditions. This isn't a decision we can make lightly. Jack's stomach tightened. More waiting. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for. Understood, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're committed to making this work. We'll be ready when you are. Whitaker's voice softened slightly. I know you will. We just need to be absolutely certain before we move forward. Jack set the phone down, his mind spinning. More time, more uncertainty. But in that moment, he realized something important. They still had a chance. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a lifeline. The future of EcoShift wasn't decided yet, but it was still in their hands. The days that followed John Whitaker's call felt like an eternity. The promise of more time from the utility company was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it gave EcoShift a chance to prove their system could handle real-world conditions. On the other hand, it meant continuing to operate in a cloud of uncertainty, with no clear indication of what would come next. Jack tried to remain focused, but every call, every email, every conversation with investors or team members felt like a dance around the same question. What's next? The pressure was mounting on all sides. Rachel had pushed forward with her efforts to find alternative partners, but the truth was that no one could replace the utility company's potential partnership, not just for funding, but for credibility. EcoShift's technology was groundbreaking, but it needed the backing of a major utility to go mainstream. Without it, they would remain a niche player, stuck in the world of small-scale installations and pilot programs. Jack often found himself alone in his office late into the night, staring at the same stack of reports that had been sitting on his desk for weeks. His mind was restless, chasing thoughts of what the future held for the company, for his team, for himself. He had given everything to EcoShift, but he was beginning to wonder if it would ever be enough. One afternoon, Jack met with Sarah and Greg in the conference room to review the latest performance data from the pilot. The solar system had been running for a few weeks now, and while everything was functioning as expected, there were still a few minor issues that needed addressing. Nothing too alarming, but enough to require attention. We've hit a couple of snags with the energy storage integration, Sarah said, tapping the screen of her tablet as she presented the data. The system's been fluctuating slightly when switching between grid power and solar power. It's nothing major, but if we don't get it fixed, it could cause problems down the line. Jack leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen. How long do you think it will take to resolve it? We can have it sorted within a week, Sarah replied. It's a minor firmware update, but we need to run more tests to make sure it won't interfere with the overall system's performance. Good, Jack said, nodding. Let's prioritize it. If the utility company comes back to us with questions, we need to be able to answer them immediately. Greg, who had been quiet until now, shifted in his seat. Jack, I've been hearing some things from the investors. They're getting anxious. They want a timeline for the next steps. They're not happy with the wait-and-see approach anymore. Jack sighed, rubbing his forehead. I know. Believe me, I know. But what are we supposed to do? We can't rush the utility company into making a decision, and we can't predict what they're going to do next. Greg's expression hardened. We don't have time to wait for them forever. If we don't get a commitment from them soon, we'll lose the investors. And once they pull out, we're done? Jack's frustration bubbled to the surface. I'm not giving up on this, Greg. Not now. We've come too far. We just have to keep pushing, even if it feels like we're stuck in limbo. Sarah nodded in agreement. We're all in this together, Jack. We've made it this far. We just need to keep going. But Jack wasn't so sure anymore. Every passing day felt like a countdown to an inevitable conclusion, and every delay only deepened his uncertainty. The investors' impatience was understandable. They were businessmen, after all. They had no interest in holding onto a sinking ship, no matter how promising the technology seemed. And yet, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something big. If the utility company came through, if the pilot program passed with flying colors, everything could change. But if not, if they pulled out or stalled indefinitely, then EcoShift's future would be hanging by a thread. In the weeks that followed, Jack found himself pulled in every direction. The pressure from the investors continued to grow. They wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. Rachel worked tirelessly to keep the investors engaged, presenting them with progress reports and outlining the long-term potential of EcoShift's technology. But no matter how promising the numbers were, it seemed like no one was willing to make a move until the utility company gave the green light. Meanwhile, Sarah and Greg worked on tweaking the system, making small adjustments that would improve its efficiency and reliability. They were making progress, but there was always something new to fix, some new challenge to overcome. It felt like they were running a never-ending race against time, and they were only getting further behind. Jack spent his nights poring over financial reports, working with Rachel to craft a proposal for the investors that would give them a sense of security without promising too much too soon. They needed more time, but how much could they ask for before the investors lost faith? It was a delicate balance. Every decision felt critical. Every conversation felt like it could be the one that either saved or destroyed everything. Then, one evening, after another exhausting day in the office, Jack received a call from an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering, wondering if it was just another sales pitch or another follow-up from an investor. "Hello?" Jack answered, trying to sound composed. "Jack, it's John Whitaker." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to hear from the utility company so soon. Could this be it? The moment they had been waiting for? "John, how's everything going?" Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everything's looking good," Whitaker replied. "We've been monitoring the system, and we're impressed with the performance. The data's been solid. I think we're ready to move forward." Jack's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the news they had been waiting for. But Whitaker's tone remained measured, as if he wasn't fully committing just yet. "But," Whitaker continued, "before we proceed, I'd like to meet with you and your team to discuss the next steps. There are a few things we need to finalize before we move ahead." Jack's stomach tightened. It wasn't a full commitment yet, but it was a step forward. A step closer to the deal they had all been working toward. "I'll arrange a meeting right away," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll be ready." As the call ended, Jack sat back in his chair, the weight of what had just transpired sinking in. They had made it this far. But the next meeting, the one coming up in just a few days, would be the one that decided everything. It was time to bring it home. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Jack barely slept in the days leading up to it. Each morning, he woke up with the gnawing weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The small, incremental progress they had made didn't feel like enough. There were still details to be ironed out, the weight of past failures haunting him every time he closed his eyes. His team knew how critical this next meeting was, and the anxiety in the office was palpable. Sarah and Greg continued to optimize the system, working late into the night to ensure the data they presented to the utility company would be flawless. Rachel, as always, handled the investor relations, her steady hand reassuring everyone that EcoShift was still on the edge of something great. But Jack couldn't help but feel that the pressure was too much. It felt as if this was the moment that would either make or break EcoShift. No one could say for sure if they would walk out of the meeting with a signed deal or another round of wait and sees. The day of the meeting arrived. Jack arrived early, walking through the office, giving everyone last-minute instructions, offering words of encouragement. But his nerves were a constant presence. Every inch of him knew this could be it. The breakthrough that would elevate EcoShift into a legitimate player in the energy sector, or the moment where everything came crashing down. The team gathered at the office conference room, where they would prep for the big day. They'd rehearse their pitches, polish their presentation, and made sure every piece of data was ready. But despite all their hard work, there was still that lingering doubt. Was it enough? As Jack walked into the conference room, he saw the faces of his colleagues. Sarah's eyes were wide with determination, Greg's arms were crossed tightly, and Rachel was doing her best to appear calm, though Jack could see the tension behind her smile. They were all in it together, and each of them carried the weight of EcoShift's future on their shoulders. "We're ready," Rachel said, giving Jack a nod as he took his place at the head of the table. Jack smiled faintly, his nerves giving way to the energy of the team. "Let's do this." By mid-afternoon, they had arrived at the utility company's headquarters. The large, glass and steel building reflected the overcast sky, casting a cool, impersonal tone over everything. As Jack and his team were led into a sleek, modern conference room, they found John Whitaker and several other members of the utility company's executive team already seated. Jack took a deep breath before shaking hands with Whitaker. The man's handshake was firm, his face unreadable. But Jack could sense that this meeting would be a turning point. "Thank you for coming down, Jack," Whitaker said, motioning to the chairs around the table. "We've reviewed the pilot results in detail. You and your team have done excellent work so far." "Thank you, John." He made sure to keep his tone even, despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "We're very proud of the results and are excited about the next steps." "Before we dive into specifics," Whitaker said, holding up a hand, "I want to make one thing clear. We're impressed with the technology, but there are still a few hurdles we need to address. This is not going to be an easy decision." Jack exchanged a look with Rachel, who nodded in return, her calm demeanor hiding the same nerves Jack was feeling. They'd anticipated a challenge, but hearing it spoken aloud from the utility company's side only made it more real. "We understand," Jack said, keeping his voice steady. "We're committed to working with you to resolve any concerns. Let's walk through everything and see how we can make this work." For the next hour, they went through a detailed review of the pilot program, with each member of the utility company's team asking pointed questions about EcoShift's technology, its long-term reliability, and how the system would integrate with existing infrastructure. Sarah and Greg fielded technical questions with ease, confidently explaining the system's capabilities and showing how the minor issues they'd encountered were already being addressed. As the meeting progressed, Jack felt a sense of cautious optimism building. They were answering everything well. Every piece of data was falling into place. It seemed like the utility company was genuinely interested, but there was still the lingering feeling that nothing was final. The final decision could still go either way. After what felt like an eternity, Whitaker spoke again. "All right, I think we've covered all the major points," he said, his gaze shifting between Jack and the rest of the team. "Now, let's talk about the next steps." Jack's heart thudded in his chest. This was it. "We're looking at a phased rollout of the system," Whitaker continued. "We'll need you to demonstrate the scalability of the technology, and we'll need to discuss the long-term cost projections and how this will work with our existing customer base." "Absolutely," Jack replied, barely containing his excitement. "We've already been working on a scaling plan, and we're happy to provide additional cost analysis. Our goal is to make this as seamless and affordable as possible." "I like what I'm hearing," Whitaker said. "I think we're getting close to something here, Jack. But there are a few more details we need to finalize before we can move forward with a formal partnership." Jack nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. They weren't there yet, but they were getting close. "Understood," Jack said. "We're ready to do whatever it takes to make this happen." The meeting ended with a handshake, but there was still much to be done. The utility company wasn't committing to anything yet, but they were clearly leaning in the direction of a partnership. Jack could feel the momentum building. The future was still uncertain, but at least for now, they were on the right path. As Jack and his team left the meeting and made their way back to the car, there was a tangible sense of relief in the air. The weight that had been pressing on their shoulders was momentarily lifted. "That went better than I expected," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We still have work to do," Jack replied, his tone cautious but hopeful. "But we're closer than we've ever been." Back at the office, Jack gathered the team to debrief. He could see the exhaustion on their faces, but there was also a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They had fought hard for this moment, and now it was within reach. "We're not done yet," Jack said, standing at the front of the room, "but we've taken a huge step forward. I'm proud of all of you. Keep pushing. Let's finish this. They were close, but they still had to prove that EcoShift could scale, that it could meet the utility company's needs, and that they could make it through the final stages of negotiation. The journey wasn't over, but they had just crossed the most critical threshold. The next few weeks felt like a blur. With the utility company's cautious optimism still hanging in the balance, Jack and his team shifted into overdrive, working around the clock to meet the requirements for the scaled-up pilot and finalize the details for the partnership. Each email, each call, felt like it carried the weight of the future. Their next move would determine whether EcoShift would make it into the big leagues or fade into obscurity. Jack found himself in meetings day and night, discussing everything from long-term cost projections to how EcoShift would handle the increasing volume of energy demand. The technical team was firing on all cylinders, led by Sarah and Greg, who were optimizing the system for a larger-scale rollout. They had made significant improvements to the energy storage component, eliminating the minor glitches that had cropped up in the earlier tests. Now, they were ensuring that EcoShift's solution would run flawlessly even under peak loads. But even as the technical side of things moved forward, the other, more delicate negotiations with the utility company were not going as smoothly. They were still waiting on a final commitment, an official go from the higher-ups at the utility company. Every conversation Jack had with John Whitaker felt like they were circling around the same point, unable to close the deal. The uncertainty was gnawing at him. One evening, as Jack was poring over the final details of a proposal for the utility company, Rachel walked into his office, her face etched with concern. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. Jack sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "What is it?" "It's the investors," she said, closing the door behind her. "They're starting to lose patience. They're pushing for results, and they're getting nervous about how long this is taking." Jack's chest tightened. He had expected this, but hearing it aloud made the pressure feel all the more real. "I know. I've been doing everything I can to keep them calm. We've been making progress, but we're still not there." Rachel sighed, sitting down across from him. "Jack, we can't afford for them to pull out now. If they back out, we're done. No one else is going to fund us at this stage. We need a commitment soon." Jack's mind raced as he considered their options. The reality was stark. They needed the utility company's partnership to secure the next round of funding. The investors had been patient, but that patience was wearing thin. Without a concrete deal on the table, they were at risk of losing everything. "I know, Rachel," Jack said, his voice strained. "I'm doing everything I can. I've been on the phone with Whitaker every day, but I don't want to push too hard. If we rush them, we risk pushing them away for good." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Jack, I get it. But at this point, we don't have the luxury of being cautious. The investors need to see progress. We need to give them something to hold on to, or we won't have a company left to save." Jack's heart sank. The weight of the situation was suffocating, and Rachel's words hit home. They were on the verge of something huge, but it could all slip through their fingers at any moment. "I'll talk to Whitaker again," Jack said, standing up. "I'll push for a meeting. We need to know where we stand." The following day, Jack called Whitaker, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. "John, I appreciate your patience, but we're running out of time. The investors are getting restless. We need to know if we're moving forward with this partnership. If not, we need to start looking at other options." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Whitaker's voice. "I understand, Jack. Trust me, we're not taking this lightly. But as I've told you, there are still some final considerations we need to address before we can make a decision." Jack clenched his jaw. "I get it, but we've done everything you asked for. The data is solid. The pilot's been a success. Our team is ready to scale this. If you're not ready to move forward, we need to know sooner rather than later." Whitaker sighed. "I don't want to give you false hope, but we are getting closer. I'll make sure we're able to get back to you by the end of the week. That's the best I can do." Jack felt the weight of those words. Another week. They couldn't afford another week of uncertainty. "We need something concrete, John. Please." "The investors won't wait much longer," Jack urged, his voice tight with frustration. "I know, Jack," Whitaker said. "We'll have an answer for you soon. I'll personally make sure of it." Jack hung up the phone and let out a long, slow breath. They had a deadline. Whether the utility company was ready or not, they had to know where they stood. As the days passed, the tension only increased. Jack's team was doing everything they could on their end, but the lack of resolution from Whitaker and the utility company was eating away at them. Each day felt like it could be their last. Investors were on edge. Sarah and Greg were doing their best to stay focused on technical improvements, but even they were beginning to feel the strain. Rachel worked tirelessly, updating investors and calming them down, but the anxiety was building, and no amount of reassurance seemed to be enough. Then, one afternoon, Jack's phone rang. It was Whitaker again. "Jack," Whitaker's voice was more urgent than usual. "We've reviewed everything, and we're ready to move forward." Jack's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means we're ready to start formal negotiations," Whitaker said. "We're going to need a few final revisions to the terms, but we're prepared to sign a partnership agreement once those are ironed out." Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was it, the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. "That's great news, John," Jack said, trying to maintain his composure. "We'll get those revisions to you immediately. Thank you for pushing this forward." "Of course, Jack," Whitaker replied. "We'll be in touch soon with the specifics." When Jack hung up the phone, he could barely contain his excitement. The utility company had finally committed. It wasn't a full-blown agreement yet, but it was the next best thing. A formal partnership was within reach. He immediately called Rachel and the team into his office to deliver the news. The moment he shared it with them, a wave of relief and excitement filled the room. The finish line was in sight, and everything they had worked for was finally coming to fruition. As Jack stood in front of his team, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had pushed through the toughest times, fought against the odds, and now, they were about to change the future of energy. The journey wasn't over, but they had finally taken the biggest step towards securing EcoShift's place in the industry. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be hurdles to clear, but the most important battle had been won. "We're not done yet," Jack said, his voice filled with conviction. "But this is the beginning of something big. Let's finish what we started." The news that they were officially moving toward partnership with the utility company was nothing short of a victory, but it was only the first step. The next phase, one that would shape the future of EcoShift, was a delicate negotiation. The terms, the details, the fine print, everything mattered now. Jack had been through negotiations before, but nothing had quite prepared him for the stakes of this particular one. The next week, Jack, Rachel, Sarah, and Greg traveled to the utility company's headquarters to sit down at the negotiation table. Their proposal had already been well received, but now it was time to hash out the specifics. The pressure was palpable. The entire future of EcoShift hinged on this meeting. If they couldn't come to a favorable agreement, everything they had worked for could crumble in an instant. The conference room at the utility company was sleek and modern, with glass walls that overlooked the bustling city. Jack's heart was racing as he took a seat at the head of the table. The team had arrived early to prepare, and the quiet hum of anticipation filled the room. Rachel sat beside him, going over her notes. Sarah and Greg were discussing technicalities on the other side of the room. The energy was different now, less hopeful and more focused. The team was prepared, but Jack could sense the gravity of the moment. This was the most critical meeting of his career. A few minutes later, John Whitaker and the other executives from the utility company walked in. Whitaker's face was stoic as usual, but there was an underlying sense of professionalism and purpose in his demeanor. "Good to see you, Jack," Whitaker said, shaking his hand firmly. "You too, John." "Thanks for having us," Jack replied, offering a brief smile. Everyone took their seats, and the formalities were quickly put aside. The room was tense, with each party eager to get down to business. "Let's get to it," Whitaker said, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "We've reviewed the proposal in depth. There are a few key points we need to address before we can move forward." Jack nodded, mentally preparing for the push and pull that was about to take place. This was where everything could either come together or fall apart. Every word, every offer would need to be weighed carefully. "We're open to discussing anything that might need tweaking," Jack said. "The goal here is a mutually beneficial agreement." We want this partnership to work for both sides. The first part of the negotiation focused on the financial terms. The utility company was wary of the initial cost projections. They wanted a clear breakdown of how the system would scale over time and how EcoShift planned to mitigate any potential risks that could lead to unforeseen costs. Sarah and Greg took the lead here, confidently explaining the scalability of the technology and how they had already anticipated many of the potential pitfalls. The revisions they had made to the system had eliminated much of the risk that had been present in earlier iterations. EcoShift is ready to scale, and we've built in contingencies to ensure cost efficiency at every level, Greg explained. We're not just selling a product, we're offering a solution that grows with the needs of the utility and the communities it serves. The utility executives were skeptical, but Jack could see that they were starting to come around. They understood the technology, and more importantly, they saw the potential. We'll need a guarantee on pricing over the first 5 years, one of the other executives, Sandra, said. If we're committing to this, we need to be sure that we're not going to see significant price hikes down the line. Jack made a mental note. Understood. We can provide a fixed price contract for the first 5 years, with provisions for adjustment based on inflation and unforeseen market changes. This gives you cost certainty while protecting both parties. There was a pause as Sandra exchanged glances with her colleagues. Jack held his breath, watching them weigh the offer. All right, Sandra said slowly. We can live with that, but we'll need to see some guarantees in writing. Jack smiled inwardly. That was the first major hurdle cleared. But there was still so much more to discuss. The next topic was the integration of EcoShift systems with the utility company's infrastructure. The challenge here wasn't just technical, it was logistical. Integrating a new system into a well-established operation would require careful planning and coordination. Sarah and Greg were once again front and center, presenting their detailed timeline for integration. They had already mapped out the entire process, from installation to full operational status, with minimal disruption to the utility's existing operations. We've accounted for everything, Sarah said, pointing to the timeline on the screen. The integration will happen in phases to ensure that we don't cause any outages or service interruptions. We also have a dedicated support team that will be on site throughout the process, Greg added. We'll be working closely with your team to ensure everything goes smoothly. The utility executives seemed more at ease with this, but Sandra raised one final concern. How will we ensure the system works reliably once it's up and running? What kind of monitoring and maintenance can we expect? Jack was prepared for this question. We offer full system monitoring, 24/7, for the duration of the partnership. Our team will monitor performance and conduct regular maintenance to ensure uptime. We'll also provide quarterly performance reviews to ensure the system is operating as promised. The meeting went on for hours. Every point of the proposal was dissected, scrutinized, and revised. But as the hours wore on, Jack began to feel that they were making real progress. The utility executives were tough but fair, and the negotiations were moving in a positive direction. As the meeting drew to a close, Jack and his team were exhausted, but they had a sense of accomplishment. They had hammered out the major issues, and now it was just a matter of finalizing the contract. Whitaker stood up, shaking Jack's hand once more. We've made good progress today. I'll need to consult with my team, but I'm confident we're getting close. Jack's heart lifted. We appreciate your willingness to work with us, John. We're ready to move forward when you are. Whitaker nodded, a slight smile breaking through his usually serious demeanor. You'll have an answer by the end of the week. I think we're close to sealing the deal. As Jack and his team made their way back to the airport, there was a palpable sense of relief. The toughest part of the negotiation was over, and they had come out on the other side stronger. It wasn't a done deal yet, but they were closer than ever to making it official. Once back at the office, Jack called the investors to update them on the progress. They were cautiously optimistic, but Jack could tell that their patience was running thin. The longer it took, the harder it would be to maintain their support. I'm confident we're in the final stages, Jack told Rachel. We just need to stay the course. This could all come together in the next few days. As he hung up the phone, Jack allowed himself a small smile. They were on the edge of something monumental. If they could just hold on for a little longer. The week that followed the intense negotiation meeting with the utility company felt like an eternity. Despite the progress they had made, The waiting was unbearable. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something huge, but the fear of it slipping away at the last minute gnawed at him. The investors, though supportive, were growing more impatient by the day, and EcoShift's window of opportunity was shrinking. Every minute felt critical. Jack's phone rang early one morning, shattering the quiet in his office. He glanced at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw that it was John Whitaker from the utility company. "This is it," Jack muttered to himself, taking a deep breath before answering. "Good morning, Jack," Whitaker's voice came through, calm yet carrying the weight of the moment. "I've got an update for you." Jack gripped the phone tightly, his pulse quickening. "I'm all ears, John." "We've reviewed the final terms with the team, and I'm happy to say we're ready to move forward with the partnership," Whitaker said, the words feeling like a lifeline. For a moment, Jack felt a rush of relief, but his mind immediately went into overdrive. "That's incredible news. But what are the next steps?" "We'll send you the final contract draft for review today. Once everything is signed off on your side, we'll begin the official rollout process," Whitaker explained. Jack closed his eyes for a second, the gravity of what he was hearing starting to settle in. "I can't tell you how much this means to us. This is everything." "I know, Jack," Whitaker said, a rare note of warmth in his voice. "It's a big move for both sides, but we believe in what you're doing. We're confident it's the future of energy." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "We won't let you down, John. I'll have our legal team go through the contract right away." The day was a blur of emails, calls, and last-minute adjustments to finalize the contract. Jack sat in a small conference room with Rachel, going through every clause with a fine-tooth comb. The legal team was on standby, and every word had to be perfect. There could be no room for error. This was the deal of a lifetime. Around midday, Jack received a notification that the final contract draft had arrived. He opened the email and scanned through the document, his eyes moving quickly from section to section. It was long, dense, but there it was, each term meticulously outlined, each detail accounted for. The partnership was now a reality. But even as he read through the fine print, there was still a lingering sense of disbelief. After everything, the years of sleepless nights, the near misses, the crushing setbacks, he was finally here. "This is it," Jack whispered to Rachel, his voice thick with emotion. "We've made it." Rachel smiled, though there was a sense of restraint in her expression. "It's almost there. But let's get everything signed before we celebrate." By the late afternoon, everything was ready. Jack's signature was on the dotted line. Rachel's too. They had done it. EcoShift had secured the deal. "We're going to be changing the world," Jack said quietly, as he looked at the signed contract on his desk. Rachel stood up, a wide smile spreading across her face. "We always knew we could do this, Jack. You've built something incredible." Jack allowed himself to finally smile. Something genuine, something that had eluded him for so long. The burden he had carried for so long was finally starting to lift. The pressure, the doubts, the constant fear that it might all collapse, gone, at least for the moment. Jack immediately called the utility company's team to confirm the signing, and he could hear the excitement in Whitaker's voice when he picked up. "Congratulations, Jack," Whitaker said. "You've earned this. I'll have our team get started on the next steps right away." Jack could hear the smile in Whitaker's voice. "Thank you, John. This is just the beginning. Let's change the future of energy together." With the deal now signed, EcoShift began the next phase of their journey. The integration process with the utility company was set in motion, and the team was already gearing up for the first official large-scale deployment of their system. It was happening. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, and the future that Jack had envisioned for so long was now tangible. A few days later, Jack stood on the rooftop of EcoShift's headquarters, looking out at the city skyline. He could see the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt surreal after the whirlwind of the past few weeks. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him back into the present. It was a text message from Sarah. "We're ready to move forward. We've got everything lined up for the first phase. Let's make it happen." He smiled at the message, feeling a rush of pride. The team was ready. They had the technology, the backing, the plan. Now, it was just about execution. As Jack stared at the skyline, he reflected on how far they had come. EcoShift had started as a small idea, a dream that had seemed impossible at times. But through perseverance, teamwork, and unwavering belief, they had built something that was now about to change the world. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't just the culmination of years of hard work. It was the beginning of something even bigger. They were on the precipice of something transformative, something that could reshape the future of energy and pave the way for a more sustainable world. Jack knew there would be challenges ahead. The road would not be easy, and there would be obstacles they hadn't even imagined yet. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. The world was about to change, and EcoShift was at the heart of it. He sent a quick reply to Sarah, "Let's do this." The morning after the deal was signed, EcoShift's headquarters felt alive with a renewed energy. Jack could feel the hum of excitement as he walked through the bustling office, greeting his team as they worked on finalizing their plans for the first large-scale deployment. Everyone knew that this was the moment they had worked toward for years, and it was finally here. For Jack, the feeling was bittersweet. As much as he was elated by the achievement, he knew the real work was just beginning. The integration with the utility company wasn't going to be smooth sailing. It would take every ounce of effort, collaboration, and innovation to ensure they delivered on the promises they had made. But for the first time, Jack wasn't worried. He had his team behind him, and they were more than capable. He sat down at his desk, looking out the window at the city below. A few months ago, this view would have been a reminder of everything that had yet to be accomplished, but now it felt like a symbol of everything they had already overcome. Later that day, Jack was meeting with Rachel, Sarah, and Greg in the conference room. The team had gathered to go over the specifics of the rollout, and Jack could sense that there was a new level of focus and determination in the air. "We've got the green light," Rachel said, opening her laptop and projecting a timeline onto the screen. "Here's the plan for the first phase of integration. It's aggressive, but it's manageable. We've already identified the key cities for deployment, and the tech team is ready to begin installations." Greg leaned forward, looking at the projections on the screen. "We've also factored in contingency plans for any hiccups that might arise. I don't expect anything major, but we can't be too careful." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "Great, but we also need to remember that this isn't just about technology. It's about trust. We've built a relationship with the utility company, and we need to nurture that as we go forward. We can't afford to take any missteps." "We'll be careful," Sarah reassured him. "We've built a strong foundation, and we're going to keep communicating with them every step of the way." Jack looked around the table at his team. There was an unspoken bond between them, one forged in the fires of late nights, stressful moments, and relentless determination. He knew that whatever came next, they would handle it together. As the days passed, the pieces of the project began falling into place. Jack found himself dividing his time between overseeing the final stages of EcoShift's internal preparations and working with the utility company to ensure the rollout went smoothly. The media buzz surrounding the partnership was impossible to ignore, and EcoShift had become the topic of countless articles and interviews. It felt surreal to see his company's name splashed across headlines everywhere, but he knew the real work was happening behind the scenes. One morning, Jack received a call from John Whitaker. "Jack, we're about ready to go live with the first deployment," Whitaker said. "Your team's been fantastic and everything's on track. But I'd like to be there for the first installation. You've done a lot to get us to this point, and I think it'd be a good gesture." Jack was taken aback. "You want to come to the first installation?" "That's right," Whitaker confirmed. "I want to see it for myself, be there to show our commitment to this partnership." Jack smiled, feeling a wave of pride. "We'd be honored to have you. We're excited to show you the system in action." The day of the first installation was electric. EcoShift's team had set up camp in one of the key cities, and the first large-scale deployment was set to begin. The utility company's engineers were on site, working closely with EcoShift's tech team to ensure everything was aligned. Jack, Rachel, Greg, and Sarah were all there, overseeing the process and ready to handle any last-minute issues that might arise. John Whitaker and his team arrived mid-morning, and the mood shifted from anticipation to excitement. Whitaker, though calm and reserved as always, seemed genuinely impressed by the scale of the operation. Jack could tell that seeing it all come together in real time was a significant moment for him as well. As they stood in front of the first EcoShift installation, solar panels now fully integrated with the utilities grid, Whitaker spoke up. "This is incredible, Jack. It's one thing to hear about it, but seeing it in action is something else entirely." Jack smiled, a sense of pride welling up inside him. "We've worked hard to get to this point, but it's just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead." "Well," Whitaker said, "if the first installation is any indication, I have no doubt this will succeed. The impact you're going to make in these communities, it's going to change everything." The first deployment was a success, and it didn't take long for the positive results to roll in. Not only did the system operate seamlessly, but it exceeded the utility company's performance expectations. The energy savings were greater than anticipated, and the community response was overwhelmingly positive. Local residents began seeing tangible benefits almost immediately, and word spread quickly. The media took notice as well, covering the success of the project and heralding EcoShift as a groundbreaking force in renewable energy. Jack's phone buzzed nonstop with calls from journalists, partners, and investors eager to learn more about what they were doing next. The pressure to keep up this momentum was intense, but Jack felt more prepared than ever. A few weeks later, Jack stood before his team again. This time, the atmosphere was one of celebration. The first deployment had been a resounding success, and EcoShift was officially making its mark on the world. "I'm proud of everything we've accomplished," Jack began, looking at each member of his team. "But I know this is just the beginning. We've opened the door, but now we've got to walk through it. We've proven that our technology works, but we need to continue delivering on our promises and pushing boundaries. The world is watching, and we're ready to show them what's next." The room erupted in applause, but it was a different kind of energy this time. It was the energy of a team that had finally found its place in the world. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but they were no longer daunted. They had come so far, and there was nothing standing in their way now. As Jack left the meeting, he took one last look around the office. EcoShift was no longer just a startup or a dream. It was a force for change. He had always believed that the world needed something better, something more sustainable, and now he was part of making that happen. The future was bright. The future was EcoShift, and it had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?